The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Rebooting the American Dream, from the introduction. It's titled Back to the Future. On April 14th, 1789, George Washington was out walking through the fields at Mount Vernon, his home in Virginia, when Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, rode up on horseback. Thomson had a letter for Washington from the President pro tem of the new constitutionally created United States Senate, telling Washington that he'd just been elected president, and the inauguration was set for April 30th in the nation's capital, New York City. This created two problems for George Washington. The first was saying goodbye to his 82-year-old mother, which the 57-year-old Washington did that night. She gave him her blessing and told him it was the last time he'd see her alive, as she was gravely ill, and indeed she died before he returned from New York. The second problem was finding a suit of clothes made in the United States of America. For that, he sent a courier to his old friend and fellow general from the American Revolutionary War, Henry Knox. Washington couldn't find a suit made in America because in the years prior to the American Revolution, the British East India Company, whose tea was thrown into the Boston Harbor by outraged colonists after the Tea Act of 1773 gave the world's largest transnational corporation a giant tax break, but the British East India Tea Company controlled the manufacture and the transportation of a whole range of goods, including fine clothing. Cotton and wool could be grown and sheared in the colonies, but it had to be sent to England to be turned into clothing. This was a routine policy for England, and it's why until India achieved its independence in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated a year later, sat at his spinning wheel for his lectures and daily spun clothing in his own home. It was, like his Salt March, a protest against the colonial practices of England and an entreaty to his fellow Indians to make their own clothes to gain independence from British companies and institutions, even though making their own clothes or making their own salt was against British law. Fortunately for George Washington, an American clothing company had been established on April 28, 1783 in Hartford, Connecticut, by a man named Daniel Hinsdale. And it produced high-quality woolen and cotton clothing, as well as items made from imported silk. It was to Hinsdale's company that Knox turned, and he helped Washington get, in time for his inauguration 2 weeks later, a nice but not excessively elegant brown American-made suit. He wore British black later for the celebration and the most famous painting, but he was sworn in wearing an American-made suit. When Washington became president in 1789, most of America's personal and industrial products of any significance were manufactured in England or in other British colonies. Washington asked his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, what could be done about that, and Hamilton came up with an 11-point plan to foster American manufacturing, which he presented to Congress in 1791. By 1793, most of its points had either been made into law by Congress or formulated into policy by either President Washington or the various states, which put our country on a path of developing its industrial base and generating the largest source of federal revenue for more than 100 years. Those strategic proposals built the greatest industrial powerhouse the world had ever seen. And after more than 200 successful years, Alexander Hamilton's program was only abandoned during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and remained abandoned to this day. Modern-day China, however, implemented most of Hamilton's plan just in the 1990s, and has brought about a remarkable transformation of its nation in a single generation. Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers is a primary inspiration for this book. It was part of a larger work titled Alexander Hamilton's Report on the Subject of Manufactures, made in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. It's the official title. And then I list Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers. And I'll share just the headlines of this. He starts out by saying, a full view now having been taken of the inducements to the promotion of manufacturers in the United States, in other words, why we should do this, accompanied with an examination of the principal objections, which are commonly urged in opposition. This was Jefferson's objection that he didn't want America to be a manufacturing nation. He wanted us to be an agricultural nation. Hamilton says, it is proper in the next place to consider the means by which it may be effected. So here he says, in order to a better judgment of the means proper to be presented to the United States, it will be of use to advert to those which have been employed with success in other countries. In other words, they're stealing this idea from England. It was called the Tudor Plan when King Henry VII came up with it. So number one, protecting duties, import taxes, now called tariffs, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones intended to be encouraged. So number one, raise the cost of imported goods. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions on some things that we think it's really important to make in America. Make the duties, the tariffs, so high that nobody would want to import them, so there'll be a strong domestic manufacturing presence. Three, prohibitions on the exportation of materials of manufacture. Why provide raw materials to other countries, like we're doing right now to China, to make stuff to sell back to us when we can simply make it here, manufacture it here? Number four, pecuniary bounties. This is one of the most efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number four. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream, and you can find it online.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Well, Meryl Streep notwithstanding, there's a lot to talk about today. Well, I guess including. But, of course, that's where all the media is going because it's the Trump show constantly. I have some thoughts on that I will share with you in a few minutes. There are a number of other interesting things going on. One of the things that I find is most fascinating is Donald Trump is, according to the Wall Street Journal, in debt to over 150 different financial institutions, and many of them have securitized his debt. They're slicing and dicing it and selling it off in tranches. It may be that this guy is not only not rich, but that he's incredibly broke. But, we'll get to that. There's a lot between here and there. But right now on the line with us is Andy Roth. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Club for Growth, clubforgrowth.org, the conservative think tank or conservative. How would you describe yourself, Andy?
We're an advocacy organization. We support lower taxes, limited government. Okay,
great. And you can tweet people at Andy Roth, ANDYROTH, or at Club for Growth, number 4. We could put this in the Donald Trump frame or not. It's one of the things that I find most fascinating about Trump's rise through the Republican Party is that he was basically campaigning as a Democrat. Democrats, which I think is why he won the Republican nomination, Democrats have fought every single trade agreement that has ever been brought before Congress. Every single one of them has passed with a majority of Republican supporters and a majority of Democratic opposers. And, this idea that Reagan had that we should just let corporations run trade in the world and forget about national interests took hold during the Bush administration. The first Bush administration, George Herbert Walker negotiated what became NAFTA, as you know, Andy. And we've been doing this experiment for 30 years. It seems to have worked out very well for China. And Vietnam and the rest of us, I'm not so sure. So the question, I guess, that I have for you is, what's wrong with protecting American jobs?
Well, because it doesn't work. The response would be to apply tariffs on imports,
right?
Which is one thing that Trump is.
You realize we're already doing that in over 20,000 categories.
Oh, sure.
It's just that the average tariff is less than 2%.
Right. What Trump is advocating is 35% or even higher.
Right, which takes us back to where it was before Reagan became president.
Right. And, we tried this back in the 1930s with the Smoot-Hawley bill, and I think, academic economists across the spectrum, liberal and conservative, believe that was a huge mistake. But the reason why it is a mistake is because tariffs are taxes, and this tax is not borne by the Chinese or whoever you levy the tariff on the import. It's borne by American consumers and American businesses.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's to the best of my knowledge, no consensus on Smoot-Hawley, regardless of what some conservative think tank has written on Wikipedia. There's no shortage of books about the impact or non-impact of Smoot-Hawley. Smoot-Hawley raised tariffs by 2%. From what, 31 to 33, as I recall, percent.
No, it was on several things, and it was more than just 2% on.
Okay, but the point is that it had less than a 1% impact on U.S. trade. Less than a 3% impact on U.S. trade, and far less than a 1% impact on our GDP. And our tariffs at that point in time were in the 20 and 30% range, depending on the products. This was an idea that Alexander Hamilton came up with in 1791 in his report on manufacturers, submitted to Congress. In 1793, George Washington had implemented either by executive order or by congressional action most of it. The tariff income was the one single source of income for the federal government. So every paycheck of every senator, everything the federal government did from the founding of our republic until the Civil War was paid for with tariffs. From the Civil War until World War I, it was 50%. Excuse me, it was 2/3 of all government income was tariffs. From World War I to after World War II, it was 1/3 of government income, and it's been declining rapidly since World War II. But it worked. I mean, it built the greatest industrial powerhouse in the world. And China is using tariffs right now, and a whole variety of other things that could be called tariffs that aren't, just nakedly called tariffs. Germany is probably the worst offender in this. They use a VAT tax as a functional 35% tariff. They discount on export. They impose the tax on import. How nobody calls that a tariff, I don't know. Japan does it. Taiwan does it. South Korea does it. Basically, everybody that we're trading with, Canada and Mexico do it. Everybody that we're trading with is either using a VAT tax or some form of tariff, and we're the village idiots. And I don't understand why you think that protecting American jobs is a bad thing.
Well, what you're advocating, though, is for higher tariffs. And as I said,
that's correct.
That's a tariff that's borne on Americans. When you look at, let's say, the fight over steel, we had the steel tariffs in 2002,
yep.
And there are routine skirmishes between the Chinese and the United States.
Ronald Reagan raised tariffs on steel, too.
Right. When you raise,
and you know what that did is it saved a steel mill.
The problem is that it does benefit American workers who work in the steel industry, but it does hurt American workers who work in like the construction industry that rely on steel, or on the automobile industry that relies on steel. So when the government gets involved in these disputes, they're picking winners and losers among the American
You're absolutely
industries.
Right. You're absolutely right, Andy, and that's what I'm advocating. I want my government to pick America as the winner. And I get it that you're saying that we should just, go with whatever the multinational corporations want. But I'd like America to be the winner. And frankly, yeah, you're right. If making steel in the United States is more expensive than making steel in China, and so we impose a tariff on Chinese steel, as you know, we're not going to buy Chinese steel and pay the tariff. We're going to buy steel made in the United States, which means that we're going to have more steel mills. We're going to have more people making good wages. Those people are creating aggregate demand and stimulating the economy. Our economy becomes more Amerocentric, more internal and less external, less worldwide. And that benefits American workers. Yeah, you might have to pay an extra $1,000 or $2,000 or maybe even $4,000 or $5,000 on the cost of a whole house that's spread out over a 30-year mortgage. It might cost you an extra 50 cents a month for the rest of your life for the cost of that steel. but you're making $30 an hour instead of $12.
You're dramatically overstating the costs or understating the costs. You know, everything that we buy from overseas would be dramatically more expensive.
You're absolutely right, and all of our wages would be dramatically higher.
Nobody could afford them because they wouldn't be producing them.
Then why could nobody afford them in the 1960s and 70s? Why could nobody afford them from literally from 1793 until 1980? If your assertion was accurate during that entire period of time, we would have all been sitting around going, oh, my God, I can't even afford a toaster because I can't get one that's made cheap in China.
The reason why things have gotten cheaper every year since the founding of this country is because of free trade. It's because of special aid.
No, it's because of technology.
And the division of labor and technology. I completely agree. All of those things have contributed to our success. Now, in our day and age, we have global supply chains that are so entrenched that for you to advocate that we should just build a wall around our country and create protectionism, I think is pure fantasy.
Well, you know, I get it that you guys have had 30 years to put this into place, and you've got your nails in deep, right? I get that, and you're right. We have multinational supply chains for a whole variety of products. And it would be a disruptive process, just like it's been disruptive over the last 30 years. Hundreds of thousands, millions of good American jobs have vanished as a result of the policies that you're advocating. And bringing those jobs back will be a process that will involve disruption. But it seems to me like it's worth it. It seems to me like when the United States, you know, we had a trade surplus from 1790. We had a trade surplus from 1793 until, what, 1986, I think was when we began running trade deficits. We literally, the entire world owed us more money than any country in the history of the world. We were the largest, when Ronald Reagan came into office, we were the largest importer of raw materials and exporter of finished goods on earth. When he left office, it had completely flipped. We had become the largest importer of finished goods, the largest exporter of raw materials, principally steel ore, coal, and wood, and the largest debtor in the nation. In the world, and it's simply gotten worse since then. How can you possibly defend that situation other than that it's, you know, incredibly profitable for the companies that are importing from China?
Well, listen, I strongly recognize that those who advocate protectionism believe that the trade deficit is this huge boogeyman, and I'm sure you know that those who advocate free trade don't think that it is. We can have a discussion about that, but
well, if we're going to go in debt to China $600 billion this year, they're going to end up with $600 billion. And what are they going to do? Well, they're going to come over here and they're going to
debt, which I do have a problem with, and that's a problem with the federal government and how it spends our money. I do have a problem with them buying.
No, this has got nothing to do with that. If we have a trade deficit, that means
they can do.
That means that they have dollars.
Buy assets, they can invest in the United States, or
that's my point. And I don't want them, Andy. Right now, you know, again, when Reagan came into office, foreigners owned less than 2% of the United States, right, of all U.S. assets. Right now, 1/7 of all assets in America are owned by foreign governments or foreign persons. 1/7. And the reason why is because for the last 25 years, 30 years, following the policies that you're advocating, we've been running up huge trade deficits, which means that all these people in other countries have dollars that they can only spend here. So they come here, they build a factory, they say, sure, I'll employ people like Jack Ma right now talking to Donald Trump. Oh, yeah, I'll create 1 million jobs in America. Where is the profit going to go from those jobs, Andy? It's going to go to China.
And I don't have a problem with it. You clearly do.
And I do.
The idea
I want that profit in the United States.
That's going to go to 100%, I think, is farcical. But listen, even if we do talk about all this, what you're advocating though is just pure lunacy, because you think that by raising
it was referred to by Alexander Hamilton as the American way.
Well, listen, if we want to get rid of all income taxes, all everything, and just have tariffs, I'm totally on board with that.
Okay, well, that's a whole other conversation. Andy Roth, Vice President of the Government Affairs for the Club for Growth, clubforgrowth.org. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. And welcome back, 20 minutes past the hour. And Jim in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Excuse me.
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. You're a wonderful host and a credit to our country.
Thank you. I'm doing my best. What's up?
The Electoral College results, when it was announced, in the Senate with Biden presiding, what happened? There was supposed to, it's common knowledge that the House and the Senate, somebody from each side had to sign the objection. What happened? There was no Democratic senator that would sign the objection?
That's right. As far as I know. And the reason why was because there were the argument that was made on which that objection was based was that there were 50 electors who were disqualified for a variety of reasons. The main one being that they didn't live in the congressional district that they were representing to the Electoral College, and let's just say that a senator, let's say Bernie, got in there and signed that thing and said, yes, I object. And let's say that the Republican-controlled House and Senate said, okay, we'll have a debate on this. And they had a debate. And let's say that the Republicans decided, yeah, our 50 electors are screwed up. They're no good. You know what would happen? They would simply find 50 electors who were qualified. It would take them 25 minutes, and the vote would go ahead the same, and the Democrats would end up with a lot of egg on their face, and they would have pissed away a whole lot of political capital that could be used for other things. That's why that went down that way. I mean, there's no possible. At every step of the way, we've had these. Oh my God! Here's our last chance to stop Trump, right? If we can just talk the Electoral College voters out of voting, well, that throws it to the House. They elect Trump anyway. If we can just disqualify 50 electors because basically they were all technicalities. They were legitimate technicalities, and I think they were legitimately not qualified. But like I said, there's no shortage of electors from every county that they easily could have just slid in. I mean, the party's got thousands and thousands of members. Every step along the way, we've been just like hanging on to this desperate reed, and it's time to realize, for all of us to realize, that this guy is going to be in the White House, and and we need to start working on that and planning on that and planning strategies to fight basically insane policies that he's promoting. And frankly, oddly enough, trade is not one of them, although we'll see what the Republicans have to say about this. I mean, I'm half thinking that the Republicans might be the ones who are impeaching Trump rather than the Democrats, and that they'll do it because if he tries to keep his campaign promise not to touch Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, and if he tries to keep his campaign promise to basically go back to a tariff-based trade system and blow up these trade deals, which I doubt. I doubt he's going to do either one of those things. But if he decides to keep those campaign promises, my prediction is that his own party will impeach him, and that they'll impeach him over conflicts of interest with his own companies and things like that. And then what do we get? We get President Pence and Vice President Ryan. And then 4 years from now, Paul Ryan runs for president, and you get President Ryan, or at least he's running. I mean, that doesn't seem like a great outcome to me either. So I think that the thing to do is to pick the battles on specific issues where the American people are with us and just highlight the hell out of it, rather than just trying to desperately hold back something that's inevitable. Let's point out those areas where we actually, all agree. Democrats have been against free trade forever. Anyhow, Jim, thanks a lot for the call. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think I made my case, in my debate with Andy, and I don't need to beat this into the ground. But this idea that here's the bigger picture here, right? I mean, because I always try to step back and look at this thing from 30,000 feet. What is the biggest picture here? What's really going on? And the big picture is the question: why do we have trade? Right? It's much like the question, why do we have an economy? Right? Is the economy here to serve the people who own most of it, the 1%? Or is it here to serve the nation and its citizens? And the 1% just get to kind of skim their piece off the top. And my opinion is the latter. So why do we have trade? Well, we have trade so that we can have things that we otherwise couldn't have. Alexander Hamilton makes this very clear in his report to manufacturers. It's the first chapter of my book and the introduction, actually, to my book, Rebooting the American Dream, which you can read free online over at truthout.org. And the argument that he made was very, very straightforward. If there's something that we do not make in the United States, and we have no intention of making in the United States, carved sandalwood, fragrance pens, or, fine French wines. Now, there's an area where actually at the time, in Hamilton's time, nobody was seriously, well, they were actually starting to do vineyards and things. But anyhow, if there's things that are made in other countries that you want to have in America, then you lower the tariffs on those things. Hey, we don't have any intention of competing on carved sandalwood. So, we don't even grow sandalwood in the United States. So if Thailand wants to export, carved sandalwood to the United States, cool. We don't need a high tariff on that. But if Thailand wants to export steel made in Thailand with, 20 cent an hour labor to the United States, or cement, or toasters, or washers and dryers, or computers, or whatever, we can make those things here. And if we make them here, the profit from making them stays here. This is the wealth of nations, as Adam Smith titled his book in 1776. And it's literally what he was talking about. The wealth of nations is raw materials with human intellect and or labor applied to them. And that, in other words, manufacturing. And that becomes the wealth of nations. So if we keep the manufacturing here, we keep the profits here, we keep the jobs here, because it's a relatively closed economy in those areas where where you have tariffs. Those jobs are tend to be well-paid jobs, and things work well. We try this neoliberal George Herbert Walker Bushite. Well, it was really Reagan's idea. This free trade thing, and what does it do? It's just gutted the middle class.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
If the cost of a toaster goes from $10 to $20, but instead of lasting a year, it lasts 5 years, and my paycheck goes from $12 to $20, I think it's a good deal. This morning, the Senate Democrats spoke up about the Republicans' plans to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And I believe one of the most articulate of the people who spoke was Senator Bernie Sanders. Afterwards, in fact, Chuck Schumer patted him on the back and said, "Thanks, buddy." And he's become Chuck Schumer's best friend. But I pointed this out to you. I think it was 2 years ago, maybe just a year ago, when Chuck Schumer gave a speech here in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, and he laid out all these progressive principles. It was like Chuck Schumer, the New York Democrat, I almost called him the New York Democrat, who one of the most powerful men in the Senate, the most powerful Democrat in the Senate, starting not to talk like the classic kind of corporate Democrat, but instead talking like a progressive Democrat, like a FDR Democrat, like an LBJ Democrat. And we played clips from that, and I said, watch this space. Everybody thinks Chuck Schumer is just, go along, get along. He's the center of power in Washington, D.C. He's a fundraising machine for the Democrats in the Senate. That's what he does. That's what he's all about. That is, some of that perception may be accurate, but Chuck Schumer has been, over the last 2 years, in front of our very eyes, morphing himself into a genuine progressive. And I think we saw more evidence of that this morning. Anyhow, here's what Bernie said when Chuck Schumer asked him to come up to the mic and speak.
Not a whole lot that I can add to what the previous speakers have said, but let me quote somebody who I suspect I will not often be quoting. On May 7th, 2015, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "I was the first and only potential GOP candidate to state there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid." Now, the point is, Trump didn't just say this in passing. He didn't say it in the middle of the night. He didn't say it in a particular interview. This was a cornerstone of his campaign. He said it over and over and over again. Donald Trump said he will not cut Social Security. He will not cut Medicare. He will not cut Medicaid. Therefore, one of two things are true. Either Donald Trump simply lied to the elderly and the working people of this country and just made campaign promises that he had no intention of ever keeping. That is one reality. Or there is another reality, and that is right now, before Congress wastes an enormous amount of time, Donald Trump has got to come forward, maybe through one of his tweets, and say clearly that Donald Trump will veto any legislation that cuts Medicare, that cuts Medicaid, or that cuts Social Security. And if he makes that clear to his Republican colleagues, we can save us all a whole lot of time and start getting to work doing what this country desperately needs to have done.
Good job, Bernie.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. And he's absolutely right. I've been saying this for a long, long time. In fact, I remember being on the air during the primaries when Trump said, that over and over again. Last week, we played you 5 different clips of Trump on the campaign stump saying, I will not cut Social Security, Medicaid, or Medicare. Not going to happen. Ain't going to happen. Donald Trump is not going to allow it. And a lot of people voted for him based on that belief. But as we speak, Republicans in Congress are preparing to cut Social Security. They want to raise the eligibility age. They want to change the way the cost of living adjustments, are calculated, and they want to change the tax formula that for taxes paid on Social Security, among other things. They're preparing to voucherize Medicare. This is quite literally the Paul Ryan throwing grandma off the cliff ad from 2011. That ad, by the way, there's a link to it up at hartmannreport.com. But it's the original ad. It's the 2011 ad. I mean, it should be reprised. This is what they're about to do. And of course, anything that has to do with Medicaid, they want to block grant this so that individual states can just cut off people. So Bernie Sanders is right. Either Donald Trump lied cravenly and repeatedly to win the Republican nomination, which I kept saying, hey, this guy's running as a Democrat. Of course people are going to vote for him. They like the Democratic policies. They don't like Republican policies. Either he lied to his base in order to get elected, or he's going to be at war with his own party, in which case they may even try to impeach him, say, over the emoluments clause, and put in Mike Pence, because Mike Pence is enthusiastic about cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And, he's just a classic Republican. So we'll see. We'll see. It's going to be a real interesting next few weeks here.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Pat in Oakville, Connecticut. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today? Thanks for being a first-time caller.
First-time caller. I love listening to you. I rarely call in. First of all, I don't have a problem paying more for a toaster if it's made here.
Ditto.
Or a T-shirt. If it creates American jobs, let's do it.
Yeah. Plus, I'd like to have toasters that last. I mean, literally, my parents, when my dad died, they had a toaster that I remember from when I was 5 years old. And when he died, I was in my 50s. I mean, that toaster literally lasted 50 years. Louise and I have gone through 4 toasters in the 6 years we've lived here in Washington, D.C. Forgive my interruption.
Where? Exactly. And my other point was the conversation you had with the Club for Growth gentleman.
Go for it.
He's against tariffs, but at the end of your conversation, he said if you do away with income taxes, he's all for tariffs.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
No, and there just wasn't time to go down that rabbit hole. I
Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did. And
tariffs are terrible, but if you get rid of income taxes, then they're okay.
Yeah. Well, and arguably, I mean, we didn't really we had income taxes for a little while during the Lincoln administration, but really they came into being in 1913, and up until that time, tariffs had been the principal form of income of revenue for the federal government, as I pointed out in that article, or in that argument rather, excuse me. But I think that basically, well, I don't want to try and project what they're thinking, but yeah, I caught that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that was crazy. Because I wouldn't have called in until I heard that, and it's like tariffs are bad, but if you get rid of income taxes, then they're okay.
Well, see, here's the deal. By getting rid of tariffs, what we've done is we've made the 100th of 1%, the people who basically control international trade and commerce, the Walton family, all the people in the supply chain for Walmart, all the, and all the other big chains in the United States that are selling stuff made overseas, and the companies that outsource their jobs. More than half of what General Electric makes is not made in the United States anymore. Apple doesn't make products in the United States. A lot of so-called American brands don't even bother to manufacture here in the United States. They shouldn't be, in my opinion, shouldn't be called American companies. But the bottom line is that their stockholders and their senior executives are getting very, very rich off that. And so I don't know if this is what he meant. And again, he's not here to defend himself, but I would argue that argument essentially is, I want the rich people to get most of the money. So if you're going to have no tariffs and you're going to have income taxes, well, that's one thing. But if you're going to get rid of the tariff, if you're going to add tariffs, which is revenue for the government, then get rid of the income taxes on the rich people. In other words, if the rich people can't make their money by importing cheap junk and selling it to us and have to go back to making their money the old-fashioned way, running factories in the United States where they have to look their own workers in the eye and pay them a decent wage, then at least do away with their taxes so that they can get richer than, whatever.
I do agree with your statement there, but you can't go a whole segment on arguing against tariffs. Throughout the whole segment, tariffs are terrible, and then right at the end, tariffs are okay if you get rid of income tax. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. There was a logical fallacy there. Pat, thanks a lot for the call. Joe in Hamilton, Alabama. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, Tom, let me turn this off speakerphone.
Thank you.
I was calling about the VP also because it made me get up and call when he said what he was saying. Because it didn't make sense. And you are absolutely right about what you was trying to tell him. Another point, I live in a very rural area. I have to drive 6 miles to get internet. There's a lot of people like me, a lot of people in the middle of the country, the ones who voted for Trump, because they don't get internet service. I know that's hard to believe. Everybody on the East Coast, West Coast gets it. But I was wondering if it would be possible for your show to run a crawler with all these names of representatives and whoever we need to call. Think about that. There's a lot of people out there like me that don't know how to get a hold of these people because I don't have internet.
Yeah. Well, Joe, do you have a pen and paper? Let me give you a phone number.
Yeah, right here. Go ahead.
Okay. It's 202-224-3121. That's the main switchboard for Congress here in Washington, D.C. And that number, you can call that number, and if you don't know the name of your member of the U.S. House of Representatives, just give me your zip code, and they will connect you to that person's office. I mean, they won't even. You can ask them for the direct number, but they'll just simply connect you. And of course, you're in Alabama. You've got two senators, Jeff Sessions, and I'm not sure who's the one. Shelby is the other.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can connect yourself to their offices also that way. So if you want to contact them. With regard to your local officials, it's a little more problematic. You have to. But that should be in the phone book.
Yeah, and if you would, like I said, maybe give this number out.
Yeah, I do it a lot, and I'll do it even more. It's a good point, Joe. And also with regard to the fact that much of America doesn't have access to internet or to internet of a reasonable enough speed that it's useful.
Right.
We need. I mean, we had this problem with telephone service. We first had this problem with electric service back in the 19-teens and in the 1920s when we were electrifying the cities, but the rural areas had no electricity. And so when Franklin Roosevelt came in as part of his program to put America back to work, he created the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA, which went out and where companies saw no profit in running long lines of to bring electricity out to farmhouses and things. Right. He said, the government will do that. We'll pay for that. We'll get electricity. And so we got everybody electrified. And then in the 1940s and the 1950s, it was the same thing. AT&T was the monopoly telephone company in the United States, and they refused to take telephone service to people in rural areas. And so we created the Rural Telephony Administration, the RTA, and I think that was Eisenhower. I could be wrong. It might have been Harry Truman. But that was in the late 40s, early 50s, the RTA. And I think we need an RIA, a Rural Internet Administration right now. We need to be off. The Internet is our new information commons. It's the new public library. And we should be driving this. And other countries are doing this, by the way. There's nobody in South Korea who doesn't have internet that is faster than anything you or I can get. There's nobody in any Western European country who doesn't have access to extremely high-speed internet at generally at least half the cost of what we pay here in the United States. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
There's a whole slew of people in these rural communities. All the information they get is just from the TV. And that's corrupt to begin with.
Well, and in fact, I'm going to do my next hour on that. We're going to get to that in just a minute because, so Joe, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. The other question, by the way, that my debate with Andy Roth brings up is if Trump is advocating Democratic policies, and he did during the Republican primary, he ran as a Democrat, which is why he won, because even Republicans prefer Democratic policies. They may call themselves Republicans, and there may be some areas where, they'll go along with parts of the Republican coalition, the anti-abortion groups or the NRA or something like that. But by and large, particularly with regard to economics, they prefer Democratic policies. If Trump is going to advance these policies, and they're policies that Democrats have always fought for, and always cared about, whether it's strengthening social or even keeping Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, or whether it's having a trade policy that's an America First trade policy, how should we react to that? When the election results came in, I was like, I'm going to fight him on absolutely everything. But, see, and I think that my guess is that this is not going to become an issue because I think that it's all talk. I don't think that the Republicans will allow him to do it. And I don't think that he's all that committed to do it either. I think he was just telling people what he knew they wanted to hear. But we'll see. It's getting to be a real interesting time. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. We're coming up on 15 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. A lot going on in the news today, a lot going on in the world today. Brad will be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls right after this. welcome back, 15 minutes before the hour. And Jesse, watching Free Speech TV in Miami, Florida. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, I think Bernie, he's the real president of this country and pretty much the world because he's challenged greed. But he's picking up from where Occupy left off, and he needs to go further. And when I say that, he needs to challenge capitalism as him representing the new abolitionists challenge capitalism as slavery. And when I say slavery, they really pretty much put the worker as a slave.
Yeah, well, slavery was a capitalist institution.
Yeah, well, the point being that when they challenged Occupy, well, what's unjust? Who's your leader? They just said it's unjust. The abolitionists came back and said all men are created equal.
Right.
If you believe in God, how can you challenge that?
Yeah.
So Bernie needs to do the same thing. Tell the boss, the capitalists, that all workers are created equal. If you challenge that, you challenge God.
Yeah, there you go. Well said, Jesse. Thanks a lot for the call. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind?
Losing my temper as fast as you. Look, what that guy does not understand is that...
That guy being Andy Roth, our guest?
Yes.
Okay.
What he does not understand is that we need not just the jobs here in the United States, we need the money to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying, as the money leaves the country and they come back and invest here, they buy property. I'm sitting here looking across the street at a house that is one of 52 in my little neighborhood that belongs to a corporation out of Taiwan.
Wow.
He came in here buying these foreclosures after the last housing crash.
Right.
Okay? So a person who is working at their minimum wage job and they're lucky enough to get, say, 30 hours a week can never, ever save up enough money to make a down payment on a home for his family. As this continues and we lose more property, you were saying 1/7. I think that 1/5 of our country belongs to foreign investment.
Well, maybe my 1/7 statistic is at least 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, it might even be 25% now of the country belongs to foreign investments. When you think about a company coming in and one day, one purchase is a 640,000-acre wheat farm, that is a chunk out of Nebraska that's gone to a foreign company. Right. But if this continues every day, every year, pretty soon there will be the day when your regular average Joe American cannot afford to buy anything in the United States, particularly if he continues to work multiple part-time jobs that don't add up to anything. A man has to have that minimum wage of $20 an hour to save enough to buy a piece of property. And if we all wind up renters, then we are all serfs.
Yeah.
And if all of our jobs are for foreign investments, we are serfs. Right. The only thing we export is war. I think, if I'm correct, the tanks are made in Indiana, which is Pence's state.
Yep.
And if he becomes president, do we go to war so his state gets rich?
Well,
where is the philosophy?
God forbid.
But a tank factory into a factory that builds new magno-electric trains. Where's the philosophy that changes what we do build?
Right.
Here?
I'm with you, Norm. I'm with you. I got to run. Thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Janice in Renton, Washington. Hey, Janice, what's on your mind?
Okay, I want your opinion. Do you think that this should be prosecuted under the RICO Act? The Chinese investment is in Renton, Washington, in a large hotel complex that's been years in the making building here. And in return for that Chinese investment, they've required green cards. So we're not only getting the Chinese investment owning property here, but we also are losing out with those workers. We don't have our American people working, and then they bring over their old parents who are under our Social Security and Medicare, and we have nothing but outgo of money for taking care of their parents.
Yeah,
What
we
do you
used
think?
to.
Is that a RICO Act?
No, it's not. I don't think that that's racketeering influenced organized crime activity, but it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong, Janice, and it's what we used to do to other countries. Back in the 60s, I mean, one of the things, if you go back, I think this is in the Port Huron statement. I may be wrong, but it certainly was one of the things that we talked about a lot in SDS meetings back in the 60s, is just, you know, this whole idea of where is the, you know, where is the essential value? What is it that we're trying to build? And well, I don't know. I'm not saying it well, but so tell me again what your question was, Janice.
My question was really, it sounded like racketeering to me when you do quid pro quo. We'll invest, but
I remember where I was going with this. You know, back in the 60s, we used to sit around and complain about how United Fruit was doing this to Honduras, right? How United Fruit was doing this to Hawaii before it became a state. Or Dole Pineapple was, or whatever it was. How ITT was doing it in Chile. And, you know, American companies were going overseas. America was going overseas. We had this surplus. We had other countries that owed us money. And we were going into their countries. We were buying up their farms. We were buying up their factories. We were bringing all the profit home. And you know, and plus we were bringing into the United States mostly raw materials from those countries that we were making into finished goods and selling back to them. We were doing this to them. And back in the 60s, we were debating the morality of that. And now it's like it's being done to us.
And they're sending their people too. And we have all this problem with, you know, Social Security and Medicare, and most of these workers are able to bring their older parents, and they want their parents to take care of their kids and help with their house payments. So they use their Social Security money to drive up the prices of our houses.
Yeah, well, I think the principal thing right now that's driving up housing prices in the United States, particularly on the coasts. But I mean, Norma just called from Alabama, and she said that in her little town in Alabama, she's got within the, you know, that she can see, and you know, in her neighborhood, 53 houses that are owned by a Taiwanese investment company. Right. And there are literally hundreds of thousands, probably millions of individual homes and commercial properties that were bought up in 2008 after the big crash by investment houses out of China, out of Japan, out of Germany, out of Holland, out of Germany, you know, Deutsche Bank brokered a lot of this stuff. And these acquisitions are making it really, really hard for Americans to buy homes. We're in a housing bubble that's being driven internationally because the United States is perceived as a safe place to put its money. And the minute our economy starts to wobble, they're going to want to pull their money out of those properties, and you're going to see the housing market crash like it never crashed before. Anyhow, Janice, I'm sorry, you said something else?
Did you know how Canada has tried to stop that? In BC, they have a law about them having to pay, I don't know if it's like a tariff or tax if they are trying to buy up houses, and they've driven up the price of houses so much in BC that they have now a law where they have to pay something like a tariff. Or
it was a 10 or 15% tax. I saw. In fact, we talked about that on the air here. Maybe 3 weeks ago? I think when it rolled out, and whether it was the entire province of British Columbia or whether it was just Vancouver, I don't remember. But yeah, they're having that same problem all along the West Coast. Is that housing values? I mean, housing values in Portland are just, you know, because Louise and I have been keeping track of them. Our kids live there. We have a house there that we own, that we sold, but we took a half of the note on it. So I own half a house right now in Portland. And it's amazing. I mean, you know, if I sold it today, I could have sold it for almost twice what I sold it for 5 years ago. And it's because all this money is pouring into Portland. All this money is pouring into, you know, just right up and down the West Coast from Asia. And the East Coast, you got money coming in from Europe that, you know, people are stashing their money here. And from the Middle East, and then, you know, all across America, it's happening. Janice, I got to move along, but, you know, thank you for the call. I think it's an important one. Vicky in Mondovi, Wisconsin. Hey, Vicky, what's on your mind?
I believe that we no longer can have American dream. Not our young people not can have the American dream of owning their own home. Like my father-in-law worked at one factory his entire life and retired with a wonderful pension. Now young people can count on going from 4 to 5 different jobs in their lifetime.
Yep.
And I believe that it's just not realistic right now. I retired from teaching, thank goodness that I was still able to get my teacher's retirement. Teachers now cannot do that.
Yep.
They don't have a union.
Yep. Yep. And this is, and guess what's going on in Kentucky? The Republicans just took over the state. And so the first thing they go after is right to work for less laws. Let's destroy the unions. And
well, we got to deal with Scott Walker here. So
yeah, you're in Wisconsin, same deal. And it's like, as soon as Republicans get control of a state, the first thing they do is destroy the unions with right to work for less laws that require by law the unions to represent, to pay for the lawyers and pay for the bargainers to represent workers in a company who are not members of the union. They are required to pay for it, and it breaks the backs of the unions. It just breaks them financially. And these laws are intentionally union busting. All right, forgive me?
I was starting to say that we had a tremendous union when I was teaching, and now the union in that school is nothing.
Yeah, and charter schools are another way that they're destroying. Yeah, exactly. That they are destroying teachers' union. Vicki, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Ed in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Tom, I was wondering if any economist that you know of has ever figured out what would happen if we did away with income tax and replaced it with a large value-added tax, maybe with some food stamp kickbacks to the poor people so they can still eat. But
I don't know of any country that's ever done that, Ed. The value-added tax is basically a retail sales tax, and so what you're describing would be one of the more regressive systems. Because, if somebody earns $100,000 in a year, let's say somebody earns the median income $44,000 a year, and they spend virtually all of it, they're paying taxes on every penny that they earned. If somebody earns $10 million in a year and they put $9 million of it in a Swiss bank account and use $1 million of it to live on during the course of that year, live in a mighty high lifestyle, they're only paying taxes, VAT taxes in this case, on 1/10 of their income rather than on all of their income, whereas the person making $40,000 a year is paying taxes on 100% of their income. So these other countries that have VAT taxes use the VAT taxes principally, as far as I can tell, to replace tariffs since the World Trade Organization. But Ed, I got to run. Thank you for the call. The idea of replacing income taxes with VAT taxes, they can coexist. They certainly do all over Europe, and in Japan, and in Taiwan, and in South Korea. But I wouldn't say one or the other. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is one of the very last chapters is titled Green Revolution. Just as America now faces an unsustainable thirst for energy, so too was Germany faced with a power crisis in the late 1990s. Growing demands for electricity collided with the reality that the country has no oil reserves and a strong bias among its people against building nuclear power plants in the wake of the nearby Chernobyl meltdown. Yet the government knew that the country needed the electricity, equivalent of at least 1 or 2 new nuclear power plants over the next decade. So how to generate that much electricity without nuclear power? In 1999, progressives in Germany passed the 100,000 Roofs program, which mandated the banks had to provide low-interest 10-year loans to homeowners sufficient for them to put solar panels on their roofs. They then passed the Renewable Energy Law and integrated the 100,000 Roofs program into it in 2004. The Renewable Energy Law, REL, mandated that for the next 10 years, the power company had to buy power back from those homeowners at a level substantially above the going rate so that the homeowners' income from the solar panels would equal their loan payments on the panels and would also represent the actual cost to the power company to generate that amount of power by building a new nuclear power plant. At the end of the 10 years, the power company gets to buy solar power at its regular rate, and it now has a new source of power without having to pay and maintain and eventually dismantle a nuclear reactor. In fact, while the reactor would have a 20 to 30-year lifespan, the solar panels typically last 50 years. For the homeowners, it was a no-brainer. They were getting low-interest loans from banks for the solar panels, and the power companies were paying for the power generated from those panels at a higher rate, high enough to pay off the loans. It was like getting solar power panels for free. If anything, the government underestimated how rapidly Germans would embrace the program, and thus how quickly power would be produced by the program. By 2007, Germany accounted for about half the entire world's solar market. Just that one year, 2007, saw 1,300 megawatts, and a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, 1,300 megawatts of solar generating capacity brought online just across Germany. For comparison, consider the average generating capacity of each of the last 5 nuclear power plants brought online in the United States. That capacity is 1,100 megawatts. So Germany had 1,300 megawatts just in 2007 added. In 2008, Germany added 2,000 megawatts of solar power to their grid, like 2 nukes. And in 2009, homeowners and businesses put onto their roofs enough solar panels to glean an additional 2,500 megawatts. Although the goal for the first decade of this century was to generate around 3,000 megawatts, eliminating the need to build 2 new nuclear power plants, the simple no-risk program had instead added over 8,000 megawatts of power, roughly 8 nuclear power plants. And because the generation sources were scattered across the country, there was no need to run new high-tension power lines from central generating stations, making it more efficient and less expensive. Meanwhile, as dozens of German companies got into the business of manufacturing and installing solar power systems, the cost dropped by more than half between 1997 and 2007 and continues to plummet. The Germans expect that by 2050, more than a quarter of all their electricity will come from solar. It's now just over 1%. Now, I wrote this book 2.5 years ago. Germany this summer produced 100% of their electricity this way. That's how rapidly this has changed just in the last 3 years. It's really remarkable. Adding to the roughly 12.5% of all German energy currently produced by renewable sources, mostly hydro, but also wind, biomass, and geothermal. The solar panel program has been so successful that the German government is now thinking that it's time to back off and leave this to the marketplace, which they've largely done. And it's not just leaving it to the marketplace. They had to reinvent their grid. There's to be a smart grid to handle all the added electricity that all these solar panels were producing. They have too much electricity now in Germany. Germany is now considering incentives to its world-famous domestic auto industry to manufacture flex-fuel plug-in hybrid automobiles that can get over 500 miles per gallon of strategic gasoline, boosted by domestically produced rooftop solar with existing technology. Meanwhile, Denmark has invested billions in having more than half of its entire auto fleet using only electricity by 2030. And China is no slouch when it comes to renewable energy. Although the Chinese continue to bring another dirty coal-fired power plant online about once a week, they surpassed every other nation in the world in 2010 in direct investment in the production of solar and wind power. As the Los Angeles Times reported in March of 2010, U.S. clean energy investments hit $18 billion last year. A report from the Pew Charitable Trust said a little more than half the Chinese total of $34 billion. 5 years ago, Chinese investments in clean energy totaled just $2.5 billion. The United States also slipped behind 10 other countries, including Canada and Mexico, in clean energy investments as a share of the national economy. The Pew report pointed to another factor constraining U.S. competitiveness: a lack of national mandates for renewable energy production or a surcharge on greenhouse gas emissions that would make fossil fuels more expensive. The ultimate power to the people is for homes to have their own solar roofs, no longer needing power lines from distant power plants owned by big transnational corporations. And a few countries are pushing this solar tipping point, like China and Germany. Book, The Crash of 2016.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Imagine if a small group of people, I mean, literally at the most a few hundred, virtually all of them fabulously wealthy white men, a few women, got together, but virtually all of them white and wealthy, got together and said, hey, let's screw our country badly, but get incredibly rich in the process. And then they did it, and they bragged about it. Now, I mean, obviously there's, I'm not talking about any particular company that is engaging in, whether it's the banksters or the chemical companies or whatever. This is something a little more subtle than that. But if something like that were to happen, it seems like it would be a story that the television media would be all over, right? Wouldn't they be talking about it on TV? Commentators would be opining on it. News reporters would be going through all the details. You'd have charts and graphs, and then legislators would be meeting to figure out how could this happen and how do we prevent it in the future? It would be the biggest story of the year, perhaps of our lifetimes. Well, it happened. And you're not going to be hearing about it in the media. Here's the story. The directors and managers and producers of a small handful of immensely powerful and profitable media corporations made the decision a year and a half ago that the Donald Trump show was more important to put on TV every day and every night than any actual news. Because the Donald Trump show brought ratings, and ratings are the variable that determine what they can charge for advertising, which in turn determines what they can charge for their advertising, which in turn determines their profitability. As Les Moonves, the chairman or the president of CBS, I don't recall which of his titles it is, but the head guy at CBS said to a group of CBS stockholders in an investor phone call, he said, what Donald Trump may be terrible for America, but he's great for CBS. Keep it up, Donald. And obviously CBS kept it up. The estimates are between $2 and $3 billion in free media that Donald Trump got in 2015, 2016, that helped him win the Republican primary first and then helped him win the White House. Literally billions of dollars in free media that was not given to Hillary Clinton, that was not given to Bernie Sanders, and that was not given to Donald Trump's opponents in the primary. It was just Donald Trump. The media, there's this orgy of navel gazing right now about the Trump media, about the Trump presidency, right? Does he, is he putting racists in his advisory capacities? Is his son-in-law too close to him? Are his businesses this and that? Jeff Sessions, his appointees to his cabinet? All this, and it's useful, thoughtful stuff. But have you heard a discussion about how did Trump become president? How did Trump even become the Republican nominee? Trump did not become the Republican nominee with the help of Russia. He did not become the Republican nominee by spending his own money, because frankly, I don't believe he has any. I think that his debt, according to the Wall Street Journal, he's over $1 billion in debt, and the financial agencies are tranching it. They're slicing and dicing his debt and selling it off as securities. That's a whole nother rant. Because what happens if Trump hotels become terrorist targets or something like that, God forbid, and suddenly their value falls, and the banks say, okay, Donald, pay up. And suddenly he's like really, genuinely bankrupt. But setting that aside. So how did Donald Trump get the Republican nomination? It wasn't any foreign guy. It was our media. Donald Trump knows, he has spent his entire life playing the media for suckers. He's been doing it since he was in his 20s. It's just that he had never done it on a national scale in a really big way. He had been, he'd always been the guy that the New York media obsessed on. So, and then you get to the general election also, did hackers, maybe Russians, revealing that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Brazile had put their thumb on the scale over at the DNC against Hillary. Did that cause Trump to win? Did he win because working white men are angry? And these are the things that the media is talking about, right? Did he win because Hillary failed to campaign in the critical Rust Belt swing states? Is he going to be president because so many people hate the government? I don't think so. I think he got to be president because he got $3 billion worth of free media. And this is like, it's like the Trump story that the media dare not utter. The numbers, you can easily find this stuff online. Over at the Kennedy School and at Harvard, they did an analysis. This was in June of last year, so it wasn't. I'm not sure when the Republican primary wrapped up, but it was. It might have been just post-primary, and just. They were just looking at free versus earned media, or free, sometimes free and pay and earned media. The words are interchangeable versus paid media. There was advertising. Jeb Bush spent over $100 million on advertising. Donald Trump spent $10 million. Nothing. That's like an ad buy in New York City for a week. You think that the media are going to talk about it? That they're the ones who put Donald Trump in the White House? Somehow I doubt it. In fact, I would even take this a step further. If what I'm implying is that the media, the corporate media in the United States, who will tell you right up front, as Les Moonves did to his investors, their first job is not to inform the American people. It used to be, when we had the Fairness Doctrine, Reagan did away with that in 1987. Their first job is to make money. So if the media decided that running the Donald Trump show 24/7 for a year and a half was going to make them the most money, and obviously they made that decision because it's exactly what they did. Now they're looking at a Trump presidency, and they've got to be licking their chops. They've got to be saying, if we had had a Hillary Clinton presidency, it would be so boring. She would just do things, if there was Democrats in charge, they would just run the country, right? They do this, we know the platform. It's like capable, competent, step by step.
Probably not a lot of scandal, depending on, how many times if the Republicans could hold on to the House, then they could probably have some more Benghazi hearings. But seriously? But with Trump in the White House, oh boy, we got 4 years to make an extra $1 billion a year. And the senior executives can take out of that, an extra $1 billion a year or $10 billion a year or $30 billion. The senior executives can put a couple $100 million in their pockets. The news stars, the infotainment stars, instead of, I think Megyn Kelly turned down $25 million from CNN. I mean, this is how much the media stars get paid. She turned that down to go to NBC, where presumably she got that or more. Everybody's getting a raise because of Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At least everybody in the media. The rest of us, we're screwed. America gets screwed. The media gets rich. What do you think? And welcome back. Patricia, watching Free Speech TV in Casco, Michigan on DirecTV. Hey, Patricia, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I got an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. There's 65 million of us who are against the wall. Why can't we use what the right has done and call it, we are not going to have our taxes pay for that wall due to religious objection. We believe in building bridges, not walls.
In other words, they argue against it the same way that they're arguing against Planned Parenthood and abortion.
That's right.
Yeah. It's an idea. It's an idea. But, here's the problem, Patricia. And again, this is the Donald Trump show on television, right? The television media have explained to us in great detail, how upset Donald Trump is that Meryl Streep, basically trashed him last night at the Golden Globes. They've explained to us in great detail how upset Donald Trump was that Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't get the same ratings on Celebrity Apprentice that Donald Trump did. Excuse me. And Trump is still getting, he's getting producer credit. So presumably he's getting some piece of the action, because typically a producer credit means you get a percentage of the revenue. So we know all about that. But did you know that last week Donald Trump came out and said, or one of his spokespeople came out and said, well, that whole wall thing, we're not actually going to build the wall. We're going to take an authorization from 2006 during the Bush administration to expand and enhance a 700-mile stretch of the border, the Texas border, that already has fencing along most of it. And we're going to add a bunch of barbed wire to that, and we're going to put some motion sensors in there, and that'll satisfy Donald Trump's campaign promise.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but I'm not making this up. I mean, they have already decided not to bother with the wall, and they're claiming victory, right? They're saying the Trump people in this say, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to do it based on this 2006 law, and we've already, it'll be easy, and it's not going to cost us that much because Mexico's not going to pay for it. And the Trump people have admitted, Trump has admitted, Mexico's not going to pay for the wall. He said, well, maybe we'll make it up, by changing our trade agreements, and so we can make a profit with Mexico instead of a loss, and that'll pay for the wall. So everything has changed. But the media is not reporting that, because that makes Donald Trump look bad. It makes him look like a hypocrite. It makes him look like a liar, which, by the way, he is. But the media is not reporting it because the media loves the Donald Trump show. So this is how it's just nuts. It's nuts. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. But
there's got to be a way to religiously object to the kind of garbage he's going to deal us.
Well, yeah, and we need to be speaking out. We need to be getting active. People are coming to Washington, D.C. for days of protest. There's going to be protests in this town on the 14th, on the 15th. Today's the 9th, yeah. On the 20th, on the 21st, it's going to be a lot of protests. There's going to be protests all over the country. And frankly, I'm guessing that they're not going to get a lot of coverage, although maybe they will. If Trump tweets about them, then they probably will. Oh, man. Patricia, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Now, you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know you've had Stephen Cohn on, more than a few times, and, I think, actually, I've even had my own Facebook page hacked by a Russian person I know, a friend, as a joke. I think they're really good at that kind of thing, and, it's really, there's no... they're not on par with us as far as democracy is concerned. So why pick on them? I mean, their history is so crazy. And I've come to the conclusion I love Russians. I have many Russian friends, and I go to a Russian Orthodox church, but I think they're just a bit crazy. They have a different history. And they have a very much a different worldview on influenced by that history, and particularly people from the Soviet period, which is that's all that I know. Although I know people from the Russian diaspora, and they have maintained the pre-revolution history and religion quite well. But it just, there's no there. And we have to, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, we have to depend on the information from people like Comey and Clapper, who have, they're basically, how can I say it, liars.
Well, Clapper did lie under oath to Congress. He's, that's established.
Oath under Congress, and nothing happened. Ha ha ho hum. This is, the Russian culture is a beautiful culture. I feel the same way about Persian culture. Why make enemies unnecessarily?
Well, here's the situation as I see it. Yeah. You and I, John, were alive during the Cold War when the Soviet Union was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was evangelical. Communism was based communism was based on the idea that we have finally figured out the right way that everybody should live. And so the Soviets were reaching out all over the world, using propaganda tools, using all kinds of things to try to convert people to their way of thinking, become communists like us. Right. We were doing the same thing. We are evangelical too. It comes out. I think, frankly, I think it's in the twin doctrines of Christianity and Manifest Destiny, to the extent that you can disentangle them, which both argue that our way is the one right way, and everybody should be like us. So you had these two great evangelical superpowers.
The only thing that I take exception with as far as Christianity, that is exactly how it's expressed, but that's a false Christianity because...
No, I don't disagree, and let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let me just finish this thought.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't
when the Soviet Union fell, communism died. And so Russia, at this point now, is no longer. They're not trying to convert the rest of the world to become like Russia, because Russia right now is a capitalist country that is a newly emerged democracy. I mean, it's a democracy that's fewer than 30 years old. Obviously, they don't have the depth or strength or quality of democratic institutions that we at least had before Reagan.
Yeah.
But you know, what do you expect? You know, it's people say, oh, you know, it's
one more thing in that, you know, in that vein. You know, we had the opportunity to do the same thing that we did at the end of World War II for the Soviet Union and the various countries in the Soviet bloc, and we were actively hatred. You know, we were vengeful towards them. I mean, I remember people talking about it, and it appalled me because I just thought, you know, not simply because I'm Russian Orthodox, but it just didn't make any sense. You know, we could have spent a lot of money building those institutions. Germany had already had 60, 70, 80 years, and they're part of the fold. They're part of Western civilization. You know, Russia is not. It's kind of on the cusp of Western civilization, impacted by a whole different way of thinking, Oriental thinking, Byzantine thinking.
Well, plus Russia covers 11 time zones. It's the largest physical country in the world. I mean, there's all kinds of different cultures and people in Russia.
And you know, they killed 40 million people in Russia, you know, in the Stalin period or somewhere around there. I mean, you know, you lose track.
Not to mention 20 million who died in World War II.
So that has such a psychic impact on people. I mean, you know, Russians have a different idea about life, you know, at the very core. They really do.
Well, I think
I love them.
I think every culture does, John. I lived in Germany for a year, and the thing that, you know, Louise and I actually thought about when we first moved there, we were you know, living on the property of this nonprofit that we've worked with for years and years, and we thought, you know, maybe we'll spend a few years here. But by the end of a year, I was so homesick for my American culture. I had no idea how different. I just thought it was, you know, Germany would be like America, only they spoke German. And oh no, it's a whole different. I mean, just the nature of friendships is a completely different thing.
Yeah,
you know.
It you know, when you get into, you really live in other cultures, and then you begin to see the differences, the cultural, anthropological differences that are really big. It's not like we're all, you know, we have our differences.
Right. Yeah. But the essence, I think, of the U.S. Russia thing is that during the Cold War, we had dueling evangelical worldviews about how economies should be structured, economies and governance, right? Communism versus free market democracy and capitalism. Right. Now, both countries are free market capitalist, and both countries are arguably democratic. So now the debate is interests. The United States is looking out for its interests. Russia is looking out for its interests. And the dangerous narrow line that we all have to walk is to make sure that where those interests may collide, it doesn't blow up in our faces. John, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Been very little discussion of Native Americans. And Native Americans are not only, you know, a minority in North America right now, but they were the original people here. We stole this country from them. We, being white Europeans, stole this country from Native Americans. And in the process of stealing the country, we slaughtered, we robbed, we raped, we pillaged. The devastation in the name of God and manifest destiny and just plain old theft and greed of tribe after tribe after tribe across this country. One of the really amazing things to do when you come to Washington, D.C. to visit this beautiful city, the District of the Goddess, is to go to the Native American Museum. And you will get it. This country was fully occupied. Fully occupied. Coast to coast, top to bottom. There wasn't a spot, a habitable spot anyway, where you didn't have Native American communities. Now, they might have had in the more hostile areas, like the desert of Nevada, you had the Shoshone, where your population density was, 100 people per square mile. Whereas in what's now New Orleans, you had, a city
right? The mound builders in the southeast, very fancy, large, sophisticated cities. So we had, there's extraordinary diversity in Native American communities across the United States, but they were stable, they were solid, they'd been here for 10 to 23,000 years. And we made every attempt to destroy their culture, to outlaw their languages, to murder them, to poison them, to give them infected blankets with smallpox. We killed off millions of them with influenza and syphilis and diseases that we brought with us from Europe. And now there is a Lakota prophecy that is being fulfilled that is scaring the living bejesus out of Lakota people in South Dakota. And I don't know if you saw this story in The Guardian. I've been reading The Guardian more and more as opposed to other newspapers, because it just does such a great job of both covering American news. They have a very, in fact, more The Guardian's a British-owned newspaper, but more Americans read The Guardian than Brits. It's one of many newspapers in Britain. It's one of the only in the United States, I think, that actually is not somebody's mouthpiece, And they have this extraordinary story at theguardian.com titled, "We Are the Protectors, Not Protesters. Why I'm Fighting the North Dakota Pipeline." And I just wanted to share with you some of this. This is from Hyuskin American Horse, is his name. He lives in Cannonball, North Dakota. And here's what he has to say. This is important stuff. "Our elders have told us that if the Zuzeska sape, also known as the black snake, comes across our land, our world will end. Zuzeska has come in the form of the Dakota Access Pipeline, and so I must fight it. I am Sikangu Ogallala Lakota, born in Rosebud, South Dakota, and writing from the front line of the movement against the pipeline in Cannonball. I have been holding this ground with my Standing Rock Sioux tribe relatives since the spring. I am defending the land and water of my people as my ancestors did before me. The $3.8 billion pipeline project is proposed to carry approximately 470,000 barrels a day of fracked oil from the Bakken oil fields, 1,172 miles through the country's heartland to Illinois. The pipeline will cross the confluence of the Cannonball and Missouri rivers, where it threatens to contaminate our primary source of drinking water and damage the bordering indigenous burial grounds, historic villages, and Sundance sites that surround the area in all directions. Those sites that were not desecrated when the area was flooded in 1948 by the construction of the Ojai Dam are now in danger again. This week, writes Hyuskin American Horse in The Guardian, and I strongly recommend you check this article out. This week, I have witnessed pipeline construction tear its way toward the water of the Missouri River, which flow into the Mississippi, threatening to pollute the aquifer that carries drinking water to 10 million people. I have seen where their machines clawed through the earth that once held my relatives' villages. I have watched law enforcement officials protect the oil industry by dragging away my indigenous brothers and sisters who stood up for our people. The fact that Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the pipeline, would use the word Dakota, which in our language means friend or ally, in the name of its project is disrespectful. This pipeline is a direct threat to all Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people, especially our future generations. And we are not the only ones. We know that burning this oil is changing our climate, and indigenous people all over the world are bearing the brunt of the catastrophes that it causes.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What an interesting day. It's just a fascinating day. the Trump tranche debt thing. This I think, Gene Eaglesham and Lisa Schwartz wrote the article for the Wall Street Journal. And the headline is, Trump's debts are widely held on Wall Street, creating new potential conflicts. The subhead, more than 150 financial institutions hold debts connected to President-elect, analysis shows. And the Wall Street Journal reports that Trump is in debt. This user M2C4. Actually, you know, I've got this. I've got some amazing climate change stuff. I've got Joe Rahm writing some amazing stuff over at Center for American Progress I want to share with you. Let's get into a lot of that in the next hour. We still have, you know, people who want to. The lines are slammed. Mark in San Juan Capistrano, California. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
It's a pleasure to speak to you, Tom.
Thank you.
I just wanted a breakdown on, or a take, if you will. After reading the intelligence report with the Russian influence in the elections, saw on there on several times referencing Russian TV.
RT.
Knowing that you're.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
RT, yeah.
And, you know, knowing that your program, you know, through the Sputnik satellite and all, you know, I just wanted...
Well, hang on just a second, Mark. Let me just clarify. Sputnik is one of several companies that underwrites this program. In other words, they advertise with us. We have no formal relationship with them for this radio show other than that. But in the evening, I do a half-hour television show that I co-produce with RT. They provide the production facilities. I provide the staff and the content, and our contract gives me complete editorial control. They have no say over what I say. So I am doing a show on RT, and frankly, I'm proud too to do so. I think of, you know, RT like BBC and AFP, Agent France Presse, or Deutsche Welle, or Al Jazeera. You know, it's countries establish these things for some kind of national prestige, as it were, and I think it's a good show that I do. So anyhow, back to you. You were saying.
Oh, I agree with you. I listen to both your morning radio show and watch the evening show. I just, you know, it's just for my help, because I know my conservative friends are going to just hammer me on this, and I just want to be able to speak intelligently concerning this, because, you know, in there was a lot of mention about the American hosts that are on RT, and, you know, making it almost sound like they're puppets of the Russian, or at least that's the way I read it. And again, when I get hammered with this stuff, I just want to be able to.
Well, Mark, go back and read the report.
Come back.
Go back and read the report. I read the report on Friday when it came out. This declassified intelligence report, and there's like, you know, about 2/3 of it is devoted to RT, and the quote propaganda, as it were. The principal argument apparently was that we had done a show saying that fracking was contaminating groundwater. And that is anti-American. It's right there in the report. I mean, I encourage you, read the report.
Yeah.
There was, I could not find in the entire report a single example. And by the way, there were 7 examples that they gave of quotes from RT. That one was from RT America. The rest of them all played in other parts of the world. So they weren't even seen in the United States. And I do this show on RT, not this show, but I do a show on RT. My show is preceded by a show called Watching the Hawks, which is Jesse Ventura's son, Tyrell Ventura, and Sean Stone's son, Oliver Stone's son, Sean Stone, and Tabitha Wallace, 3 of them. They do a show. And they're liberals, they're progressives. What's his name? The comedian. It just blew out of my brain. Say it again. Lee Camp. Thank you. You got to push the button there if you want to talk to me, Troy. Lee Camp is a comedian. He is to the left of me. I would submit to you, Mark, that whoever wrote that report never bothered to watch RT, because I think that if you were to take all the anti-Trump and all the pro-Hillary Clinton stuff that appeared on a television network and add it all up, everybody thinks MSNBC was the great liberal network, but Morning Joe is their main show. And Morning Joe is where Donald Trump came from. And Morning Joe is a very conservative show. And the rest, you know, most of the day, they're just kind of straight down the middle. They've got some progressive commentators in the evening. but I would bet that RT had more content, more pro-Hillary Clinton content than any other American television network. Because we were all, I mean, I was on there pitching Hillary Clinton every single night on RT. The Hawks are on there talking, you know, pitching. They were not so much explicitly for Hillary. They just hated Trump. There's only one of all, you know, I know the producers and the on-air staff who work there. And yeah, they're all Americans. And not all. Well, actually, yeah, I think pretty much all are. And as there's one libertarian that I get in arguments with, and I'm not going to name her, but she's on the air there, and she talks libertarian stuff, and she doesn't support Trump. And then the rest of us are all progressives. So it's like, you know, at least bother to do your damn homework, you know, if you're gonna criticize something. So that's my take on that. So have I answered your question, Mark? I would be glad to answer any questions you have about this.
Yeah, yes, you have, and thank you so much. And I do appreciate listening and you taking this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the call too. Micah in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Micah, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Just want to make sure I have you on speaker. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So I had a question in regards to your take on Russia as a whole. You mentioned earlier in the program that you thought it was a relatively democratic society.
No, I said that they are a new democracy. I was in Russia. I was in Kaliningrad the week of the very first election in 1,000 years. Russia had been a republic for 1,000 years, and it was the first election. It was the election where Boris Yeltsin won. And I was staying in the home of a Russian family. I was working with an international relief organization, Salem International. They've got a program in Kaliningrad. You can see it on their website at saleminternational.org. And in fact, I wrote a whole chapter about this for my book, The Prophet's Way, about my experience in Russia at that time. And so my point was that they had gone from being this communist dictatorship, for lack of a better word, to being a, you know, to being a small d democratic country using big C capitalism. And frankly, their capitalism, I think, it's more extreme than ours, you know, more oligarchs and all that kind of thing. And I would, you know, but that was my point. Anyhow, forgive my interruption, Micah. Back to you.
What do you think? So I don't hear, from my perspective, there's a lot of media coming out, or a lot of information coming out from media outlets, that in some cases, left-wing media outlets, for instance, the Center for Investigative Reporting, Reveal recently did a podcast on Russia's new scapegoats, and it was a investigative report on how Russia is basically scapegoating the homosexual community. And
yeah, there's, you know, Russia right now, with regard to gay people, is kind of like where America was in 1950. And, you know, America in 1950 was a pretty evil place for gay people. In fact, it was right up until maybe 20 years ago. And so again, I'm not defending this. I'm not here to say that I want to move to Russia. Or I think it's a wonderful, you know, it's the world's best country or anything like that. I am, I'm not. I don't even have any Russian ancestry. You know, I just do a TV show on that network. But my point is that where we have to worry about our relationship with Russia is not the old worry that we used to have, that they're going to try and propagandize us and turn us into communists. That was the big fear up until the fall of the Soviet Union, was that, and that was, you know, the McCarthy hearings, you know, there are Russian agents in the State Department, there's communists all over the place, that SDS was communist, that the Black Panthers were communists, that the Russians were influencing things, all this, you know, and that Vietnam was a proxy war with Russia. That's all gone. Now it's a matter of their interests versus our interests. And there are a lot of areas where our interests coincide, like, you know, having a stable world. But there are some areas where a Russian interest and America's interests do not coincide or may come into conflict. For example, you know, who gets the oil that's in the Arctic? There's going to be a fight over this. You know, it's you know, you see this coming. For example, in Ukraine, one of the American oil companies has a $10 billion deal to frack oil out of Ukraine. And you know, the Russians kind of screwed that up for a while. And I don't know if the deal is back on or off or whatever, but, you know, there's that. There's the whole NATO in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. We are doing, on the 20th of this month, on the day that Donald Trump is being inaugurated, we're doing war games against Russia on Russia's border, which has them totally flipped out. And it's not even being covered by the American media. These are things that concern me. These are, I think, legitimate concerns that we should all be talking about, and we should be having rational conversations rather than boogeyman conversations. But it's, I'm starting to get redundant, Micah. Have I made my point?
Yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but to get back to your take on providing a stable world, and I know the United States has so many sins. I mean, I was listening to it was a Netflix documentary series. What was it? It was American history, I believe, but it was a take from the standpoint of, I'm rambling, but what I'm trying to say is that the United States has so many sins, but I feel like right now, based on the information that's coming across a variety of sources, and I realize there's a lot of fake news and there's a lot of bias in the news that we have, but spanning a variety of news sources, there's a lot of instability occurring within the vicinity of the Russian area.
Yeah.
So do you believe that's the case, that they're looking for stability? Because there seems to be a lot of instability when it comes to areas that Russia's involved in.
Well, they would argue, and I think it's actually there's some legitimacy to the argument, that by breaking the deal that Gorbachev had made with Reagan, that Micah, hang on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm gonna invite Steve Cohen on sometime this week, and we'll talk about this in greater detail, Micah, because it is a topic that needs to be discussed. Thanks a lot. And welcome back. Let's see here. Robert, watching Free Speech TV in Westminster, Colorado. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind?
Thank you, Tom. I called to take us back to the discussion on free trade, but the comments about your program being on RT brought something else to mind, too. I'm thankful for RT because they carry your program.
Me too.
I think a more honest criticism would be directed at corporate outlets that aren't clamoring to get you on their lineup.
Or corporate outlets that don't reveal their own bias. You know, the fact that Comcast, which owns NBC and MSNBC, has got 4 lawsuits going on to try to stop net neutrality, and yet they never, it's never revealed on the television networks what the interests of its owners are. Whereas RT is pretty upfront. Hey, we're the network from Russia. Anyway,
I think you just exposed the reason for the distraction. This thing about the free trade, I believe that free trade disrupts the true economic cycle.
Yeah.
Economic cycle is commonly distorted by being defined as a linear stock market looking graph.
Mm-hmm.
But for the American workers, the biggest impact comes from the disruption to the economic flow of labor, income, and purchasing power.
Right.
And I believe their attitude, there's a religious-like attitude toward the denial of wealth to common, quote, people, despite the fact that that attitude is consistently condemned by the biblical record. And a strong government that benefits common people becomes the enemy.
So, therefore, we should do what about our trade policies? This is where you started.
Well, I believe your arguments are a lot more honest and based in reality. Where this,
yeah, well, see, this is a theology, Robert. I mean, the neoliberalism is a theology. It's an idea. It's a belief system that has no evidence, and it's never been tried before. Let's have one world. Adolf Hitler proposed this, by the way, in the 1930s. That he would have 1,000 years of peace worldwide with Germany in charge. 1,000 years of peace, one world. Brilliant idea. And a lot of people bought it, right? A lot of Germans, at least early on, bought it. And so back in the 80s, the idea that Reagan was floating was if we have one interconnected world trade-wise, and in fact there was a book written about this, that no two countries that both have McDonald's in them have ever gone to war. In other words, capitalism prevents wars. Well, in fact, countries with McDonald's have gone to war lots and lots of times since that book came out back in the late 80s or early 90s. But it was this theology, this religion, that if we can just get the entire world interconnected economically, then there will never again be war. And it's harming nations, and this was also the principal theological belief that created the Eurozone, and which is also failing right now for the same reason. And so, you know, it's hurting the people, but B, it just doesn't work. And the process of the challenge is going to be disentangling this thing, is undoing it without causing a crash, undoing it in a way that doesn't just like devastate the lives of working people, undoing it in a way that doesn't lead to World War III. And that was, you know, something that I talked about at some length in my book, The Crash of 2016, because typically the way these things do get undone when you have systems that don't work is you have giant economic crashes followed by world wars. And I'd rather not have that happen again. Robert, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. And on the line with us is Victoria Jones. Happy Monday, Victoria.
And happy Monday to you too, Tom.
Thank you. So what's up?
Trump transition officials confirmed that Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and a major real estate developer in New York, will be named a senior advisor to the president.
He's also the owner of a major New York right-wing newspaper, isn't he?
He is involved in the Observer. That's correct. Yes. Yes. He's also involved in a Chinese development deal that's in the works right now. So this post has focused a lot of attention on his myriad potential conflicts of interest, the New York Times is putting it. There's also the question of potential nepotism, because having a son-in-law in the West Wing, does that violate anti-nepotism laws? But
now let me get this straight, Victoria. I just need to understand this.
Yes, please.
The book Clinton Cash and the argument that was, which large parts of it have been debunked, but the basic thesis was that countries that wanted to influence the United States were making donations to the Clinton Foundation. Nobody was suggesting the money was actually going to Bill and Hillary, which somehow always got missed in the media. But in any case, and the Republicans were all upset about this, about the fact that Hillary Clinton might be influenced by a foreign government having given money to a foundation that literally is vaccinating children in Africa. That really freaked him out. That was a horrible conflict of interest. Now you've got people who are actually making money with foreign governments in ways that might not work to the benefit of the United States. And suddenly, nobody cares about conflict of interest? Do I have this right?
That's a way of looking at it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted a reality check here.
That is what I think Democrats will say. And there may be questions asked along those lines if, as scheduled, Donald Trump holds his press conference on Wednesday.
Yeah. Or if he does. I mean, I'm guessing he probably will, because he wants to distract attention away from Jeff Sessions and Rex Tillerson being grilled by Democrats in the Senate.
It'll be interesting to see whether he tweets during those confirmation hearings.
Yeah. And whether the media follows him, all the TV, particularly the cable TV networks, follows him like, a dog chasing a new car.
Yes.
So, anyhow, what's up? What else is up?
The 26-year-old Iraq war veteran accused of killing 5 people and injuring 6 others at Fort Lauderdale Airport in a gun rampage appeared in federal court today on charges that could bring him the death penalty. That's Esteban Santiago. He was escorted into the courtroom. Now, he's admitted to investigators he planned Friday's attack and bought a one-way ticket from Alaska to carry it out. Now, authorities say they have not ruled out terrorism as a motive. They're also investigating whether mental illness played a role. In November, Santiago went to an FBI office in Anchorage, told agents he believed that the CIA was controlling his mind and putting ISIS information on his computer and telling him to be recruited by ISIS.
Now, at that point, when he went to the FBI in Anchorage, Alaska, he was an Iraq War veteran.
He was an Iraq War veteran.
Why, when he said that to the FBI, why did somebody not walk him over to the nearest VA hospital and say, this man needs to be institutionalized for a psych evaluation?
Well, he was given a mental health evaluation, and he came in with an ammunition clip, left the gun in the car with his newborn child, he was given a mental health evaluation. And he was kept at a hospital for a few days. It was apparently determined there wasn't anything wrong, and that he hadn't done anything wrong. So they gave him back his gun. Now, according to his brother, there was no follow-up treatment.
Yeah, this seems to me like this is, back in the 60s, we had this phrase about the Vietnam War. The war comes home, and it was about, dead bodies coming home. It was about broken bodies coming home. It was about people coming home contaminated with Agent Orange, people coming home just, with horrible PTSD from the things that they had seen or the things that they'd done, that they'd had to do. And
yeah.
And the war comes home, and we sit around and we, George Bush, charging off to Iraq in 2003. Nobody ever sat around and said, "What's this going to cost? What in the human cost? When this war comes home? Because they always do. When this war comes home, how are we going to handle that?" And we're still not having that damn conversation.
Right. Now, some experts in PTSD and schizophrenia are saying that his behavior seems more symptomatic of schizophrenia than it does of PTSD.
Right, which should have been caught, frankly, while he was in the military, because schizophrenia typically comes on between the ages of 17 and 23. And I don't know how old he's in his mid-20s, wasn't he?
26.
Yeah, so if he's schizophrenic, he's been schizophrenic in all probability. Now, there are outliers, but, if you look at the bell curve, about 80% of people who become schizophrenic, it comes on post-adolescence and adulthood. And so he's probably been schizophrenic for some time. And it should have been caught.
It's possible. And
it should have been medicated.
It sounds like there were a number of red flags here. He was not put on a no-fly list. He was not put on any sort of watch list. And, of course, his gun was returned to him.
Yeah, amazing. Well, the wars come home. That's all I can say. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Victoria, it's always great to see you. Happy Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, too.
We'll be back with more. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. We fight wars all over. This is from the last chapter, chapter 6, titled Staving Off Extinction. We fight wars all over the world for oil, and we don't even need it. That in and of itself is insane. But when you look at a 250 million-year-old piece of sedimentary rock and see that it's virtually barren of fossilized life forms, you realize that this is a hell of a lot more important than whether or not our country is going to fight stupid wars in far-off lands so the oil companies and the Koch brothers can continue to get rich. This is about the survival of life on this planet, at least as we know it. To hold back extinction, the human race must immediately limit carbon emissions. There are a number of ways to do this. To start with, governments around the world can simply set a limit on carbon emissions and begin fining businesses that pollute beyond that cap. If we want to make it more politically palatable and throw in some profit for the banksters who own so many of our politicians, we could also let businesses and banks set up an exchange and trade carbon credits. Businesses can buy the right to pollute or sell the consequences of their good behavior. In that way, the banksters get to skim a piece off the top, just like they've managed to do with pretty much everything else. This is our best chance to stave off extinction. However, it's politically impossible, at least for now. Although as the consequences of global warming further manifest themselves, political will for a hard cap will undoubtedly build, just like it did with sulfur dioxide that caused acid rain back in the 1980s. It's rarely discussed in the press, but President George Herbert Walker Bush successfully pushed through a cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide, which radically curbed acid rain. It's to buy humanity time in the short term, we may have to settle for a more modest proposal, such as a carbon tax. The concept is simple. Put a price on pollution. Under a carbon tax system, a business would pay, for example, $20 for every metric ton of carbon that they spew into the air. As of 2013, 33 countries and 18 smaller jurisdictions around the world have already put some sort of a price on carbon. In February of 2013, China, the world's largest polluter of carbon, announced plans to implement a carbon tax themselves. And the European Union runs a carbon cap-and-trade system. In 2010, Congress nearly passed a comprehensive cap-and-trade law that would have kept carbon emissions at a rational level and required businesses that wanted to pollute beyond the limits to buy carbon credits on the market from other businesses that were polluting below the level. Though that measure died by a Republican filibuster in the Senate, elsewhere around the world, carbon taxes are flourishing. Alongside the EU's cap-and-trade system, several other European nations are also taxing carbon. They include the nations of Scandinavia, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Ireland. Other like-minded countries include Costa Rica, which funnels tax revenues from carbon polluters to indigenous communities to help fight deforestation. South Africa, where new auto sales include a carbon tax, and full-scale carbon tax across most other industries have already been implemented. And India, which has a carbon tax of 50 rupees per ton on coal produced or imported into India. South Korea and Japan have also passed carbon tax measures. Several provinces in Canada have carbon taxes. And here in the United States, there are local carbon taxes in San Francisco, Boulder, and Montgomery County, Maryland. While quietly, business leaders and even Republican lawmakers are coming around to the idea of extending a nationwide carbon tax. For a moment, consider exactly what big oil is doing to our planet and how much money they are making in the process. The 5 biggest oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and ConocoPhillips, dump roughly 1 billion pounds of carbon into our air every single day. A modest carbon tax that would cut their daily profits by about $10 million and still total for them a staggering $332 million in profits every day is something they can afford as one part of a comprehensive energy policy. It's the bare minimum that carbon polluters should be paying, considering the damages they're inflicting on our planet. Pollution costs, like global warming, are called externalities. These externalities also include the medical costs of increased asthma and cancer care associated with 1 billion pounds of pollution being burned into the air above our communities every single day. They include the cost of ecological devastation caused when oil rigs explode in the Gulf of Mexico or tankers run aground and spill open off the coast of Alaska. They also include the military costs of deploying armies around the world to ensure that the oil spigots in hostile regions keep flowing and the shipping lanes remain open. And they include the costs associated with climate change, costlier storms, rising sea levels, flooding, and agricultural devastation. Carbon polluters themselves pay for few, if any, of these externalities, but instead they try to pass the bill along to all of us affected by their pollution. That needs to change to prevent disaster. When the day comes that businesses know pollution is at their expense, they will begin to reduce their carbon emissions. Capping carbon levels alone won't work. Research out of the MIT Global Change Institute assumed a $20 tax per ton of carbon pollution, increasing 4% every year, and found that it would only modestly curb emissions. This carbon tax scenario falls well short of even the White House's goal of cutting carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And it would come nowhere close to staving off the projected temperature increases that could take our planet over the extinction tipping point. So a carbon tax needs to be part of a broader plan that not only eliminates incentives for the use of carbon-based fuels, but altogether phases them out and replaces them with new, cleaner energy alternatives. This will require massive government investment in research and development. It's basically calling for a new Manhattan Project. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let me see here. There's a couple of stories. There's in particular one that I wanted to get to that kind of goes off into science land, and that I think is particularly fascinating. And this is that climate. It's the headline. This is from the University of Bonn, as in Bonn, Germany. And the headline. It's published over at ScienceDaily.com. And the headline is "Climate Change Could Trigger Strong Sea Level Rise." The subhead: International Research Team presents findings from Frozen Climate Archive of Antarctica. And it reads, about 15,000 years ago, the ocean around Antarctica had seen an abrupt sea level rise of several meters. It could happen again. And this is not like the big dramatic stuff. I mean, this is just, several meters, 6, 8, 10, 12 feet of rapid sea level rise that happened 14,000 years ago. And, as part of apparently something that's just relatively cyclical. Although we're recreating that, they note the co-author Dr. Weber of the Steinman Institute at the University of Bonn says the largest melt occurred 14,700 years ago, and it was ice falling off Antarctica into the Arctic Sea, or into the and into the world's ocean, shall we say. And he says during this time, the Antarctic contributed to a sea level rise of at least 3 meters within a few centuries. Now, that warming 14,700 years ago that created that was a much more gradual warming than what we are doing to the planet right now. So, I think that we should be very, very careful about this. I mentioned Kentucky. I think in the first hour, I want to just point out that on Saturday, the new Republican governor of Kentucky signed a new right to screw unions bill. Right, they call it right to work for less. And in fact, it is the right to work for less, because if you live in a state, in one of the I think it's 27 or 28 states now that have passed these right to work laws that require unions to bear the cost of legal defense, any kind of job-related interactions, and of course negotiating contracts and things, to bear the cost for people who work in a company who are not members of the union. So, you know, a right to work for less law basically automatically guarantees that the unions in the state are going to be at least cut in half. They're going to be devastated. They're going to lose a lot of money, if nothing else. And historically, union money has been Democratic Party money and all that sort of thing. So you know, here it goes. I mean, this is just what they do. The other point that I wanted to point out to you was this piece in today's Financial Times, and actually it was yesterday's Financial Times. It was by Stephen Smith, and the headline was "Reaganomics Redux will be beyond Trump's reach." I thought this was really fascinating because, you know, I have said on this program a number of times that I'm experiencing deja vu. This, you know, the Trump Republican shtick that's happening right now is so much like what I remember from 1980, which was we say one thing, we do another. Ronald Reagan said, we've got to get down our national debt. When he came into office, the national debt was $800 billion. It wasn't even $1 trillion. When he left, it was pushing it was in the neighborhood of $2 trillion. It had just about tripled. So, you know, he obviously, you know, say one thing, do another, right? He said we need to shrink government. He massively expanded the size of government. Outside of wartime, more than any other president ever had. Well, not outside of wartime. Outside that wartime in the Great Depression, you know, FDR. So Reagan basically, you know, stimulated the economy with a lot of spending while he was telling us all that he was cutting spending. And then he cut taxes on rich people, which drove up the debt. And he told us that the stimulus that we got through the increased spending, and much of it was military spending, but still, you know, his whole Star Wars thing cost $1 trillion. That spending stimulated the economy. And so what they told us was, hey, the economy's doing well, not because we're doing any spending, because we're not doing that, because we're conservatives. The economy's doing well because we cut the tax rates on rich people. It was a complete bait and switch. And to this day, Republican suckers fall for this. And I was predicting that Donald Trump will do the same thing. In fact, I predicted it a number of times on this program. So here, this is just fascinating. Stephen Smith writes, this section is taken from our market site and Smart Money columns written by industry contributors and FT commentators. And this one by Stephen Smith. The world is too different from the 1980s for President-elect Donald Trump to achieve a rerun of Reaganomics, argues the FT's John Plender. And the bond markets may have a nasty surprise in store for them. The economic and political landscape varies so much in terms of stages of recovery, unemployment, energy prices, and debt levels that there's a very real possibility that markets are now underestimating inflationary pressures. The shift from bull to bear markets is rarely accomplished smoothly. The risk is of a spike in interest rates and bond yields. We're already seeing that happen, by the way, at least with the spike in bond yields, which is, you know, crushing people who have invested in bond ETFs and things. And the interest rates are coming, according to Janet Yellen. The erratic rhetoric, back to the Financial Times, the erratic rhetoric of Mr. Trump could well provide the spark. And then the quote from the article, the bond market could turn into the Achilles heel of the economy. It is a safe bet for the year ahead. The bond prices will see episodes of more than usual volatility. And then they say Trumponomics will set the pace for market uncertainty in 2017, with policy shifts casting a long shadow, warns Alliance Bank's Mohammed El Aryan. He's one of their economists. It's an article that he wrote for the Financial Times. The article that I'm telling you about basically points to about 7 other articles that are summarizing what I just told you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But the net is, you know, I might be a year off on my crash of 2016, but I'm still seeing the same scenario. And welcome back. Let's see here. James in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. Up.
Good. You bring up so many subjects and they change so fast that by the time you get to your point in the queue, you kind
Yeah, I'm sorry. You've been on hold for a half hour. It says. Thank you. So what's on your mind?
You talk about so many different things, but I called in originally just to talk about RT because you were on that subject a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, I understand that people in your situation, you guys are in need of a microphone anywhere you can get one that's going to give you the unvarnished truth that you're allowed to get out. And I don't blame you. I would be looking for those microphones, too, because you don't get many in this country. However, I just wanted to mention, because you brought it up, there was a program called Watching the Hawks.
Right. Still is.
And what's the guy's name? There's a gentleman and a lady.
Yeah, it's Tyrell and Tabitha.
Right. I remember one day he was talking on the show. I watch it because I watch your show a lot in the evening. We travel a lot, but when I can get it in hotels, I watch it. And I was watching it one night, and I watched this guy say that this was back when campaign was going on, and Trump was. They were talking about Trump. This guy was talking about Trump flying into Moscow. His plane flying in quite frequently. They said at the time it was something that somebody said they saw Trump's plane in Moscow, and it was a big scandal. He said, "Hey, what's the big deal? It's seen there a lot." In fact, in the 10th anniversary of RT, he was there. He and Putin were talking and blabbing, and he says he knows Putin, and he said this on Watching the Hawks on RT.
Yeah. Well, I was at that dinner, James, at that 10th anniversary dinner, along with Jill Stein and along with Donald Trump's new national security advisor, General Flynn. I moderated a conference, a panel there with Julian Assange and a few other people. And I can tell you, Donald Trump was nowhere to be seen. In fact, Donald Trump's name was never even mentioned. So I don't know what Ty said on the air, but Ty was there. His dad was there. Jesse Ventura was there because Jesse's got a show on RT also.
Right, and Ty said, I saw Donald Trump there, and he was talking.
He must have been. James. Either he misspoke, or you misunderstood. Because I'm telling you, 100%, there was no Donald Trump there. Like I said, there wasn't even a reference to him.
Well, believe me, then I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and assume that I had a couple, 2 martinis minutes.
Okay, because I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, and it was an interesting time. I mean, Louise and I were Louise was with me, and it was a cool trip. I hadn't been to Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union, and it was amazing to see the difference. It was just amazing.
I was blown away. Candace and I heard that on TV, and we thought, "Whoa, this is amazing that he's in there all the time." And I thought,
"Yeah, there's something wrong with that story, James." And I don't have any idea what it was because I didn't see the show, but I can just tell you for sure that that didn't happen. Thanks a lot for the call, James. I mean, what was said didn't happen. James, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 20 minutes past the hour. And Sean in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind? It says you're a first-time caller here. Thanks for calling.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. What's up?
Can you hear me? Okay.
I hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah, the points I kind of want to bring up are kind of what the last caller was talking about. It's sort of like a Red Scare again, and I think it needs to be more progressive.
Except they're not Reds. That's the thing. It's like
I understand that, but I mean, it's like that old mentality.
I get that. I mean, if you want countries that are that we should be concerned about, right? That are evangelical, that are spreading a toxic worldview around the world, I would put at the top of that list Saudi Arabia. Right? They've been exporting Wahhabism forever.
Exactly.
But to the best of my knowledge, Russia and the United States are both, well, the United States, we've been supporting Saudi Arabia, but both of us are concerned about the export of Wahhabism. So anyhow.
Well, in our own country, we've come across this oligarchy where our own votes are even under scrutiny by the conservative corporations / capitalistic way of how we even live in this time.
Yeah.
And
we've got some work to do. I mean, we need to clean up this democracy, and that's not something that's going to happen because
I don't even think we have a democracy anymore.
Well, that's what Jimmy Carter said on this show last year. He said, we live in an oligarchy now with unlimited political bribery. That's a verbatim quote. And I wouldn't disagree with it, but I do think that there's enough democracy left in the United States that we can recover this country. I'm actually optimistic.
Then if we can get there, we have to bridge the old thinking to the new way, progressive thinking.
I agree.
And the old thinking capitalistic way is not going to work for this country in any sense. And I believe in my generation and younger generations that they don't even know what's going on because they're so inundated with all this bourgeois mainstream media.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it's like Soma. It's we're being entertained to death. It's clickbait television
of old gladiator times, where if Romans were entertaining their citizens, they didn't look to politics.
Right. The phrase was bread and circus. Give them bread and circus, and the people will be quiet.
Absolutely. And this is what we need to progress out of because I see any future, and the future is oligarchy and capitalism, and it has got to stop. I mean,
I think it's going to implode on itself. In fact, I think it already is. I think we're in the process of watching that happen, and I think that the election of Donald Trump is a symptom to a certain extent of the implosion of the oligarchy in the United States.
Before, the Reagan times, he was an actor. He was somebody in the media, and now we have Trump, and he was a reality star, and he's now the president of the United States.
Right.
And it's just beyond my capacity of thinking that we could even process electing a person that not, for one, doesn't even have any political experience, military experience. I mean, how can you even deal with another country if you can't even talk about?
Yeah. Well, this is where we need to, work as hard as we can to build progressive institutions and build the Democratic Party back up, number one. And number two, we need to basically, pray that this guy doesn't do anything crazy.
That's what I'm talking about, too, is we got to stop kicking the hornet's nest.
Yeah.
Because this man is so prone to being insulted that if anybody says anything out about him, he's going to outland. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes. I watched John Pilger's movie a couple of weeks ago. I talked about it here on the air, The Coming War with China, and he thinks that the United States is setting up a war with China. I see so many potential flashpoints around the world, and one in particular is that Saudi Arabia is become unstable now. And as the main exporter of radical Sunni Islam, they're getting bit in the butt by their own exports. So anyhow, we'll see where it goes. Sean, good points all. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, under that right to work for less state laws.
Yeah.
Even if you refuse to pay the union dues and you're in a union shop, they have to represent you.
That's my whole point. That's why the right to work for less, that's the mechanism by which right to work for less laws destroy unions.
Yeah, well, it's getting something for nothing, and that's against DNA of the Republican Party. Is
You would think. It's like passing a law that says that if you hire a lawyer to represent you, which is, by the way, what you do when the union represents you, typically it's a union lawyer who's representing you. If you hire a lawyer to represent you, you don't have to pay him.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. This is turning out to be the Reagan presidency all over again.
Yeah.
You got somebody in there that knows nothing about governing, and he's surrounding himself with all these wizards who are nothing but thieves in disguise.
Yeah.
And just like Reagan, they're telling him what to do. It's going to be good for your brand, Ronnie. Do this, and he's doing the same thing with Trump.
Yeah, we've both seen this movie before, Corky, and thanks for validating my deja vu. I got to move along, but Corky, thank you for the call. Cindy in Seattle. Hey, Cindy, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. Thanks for your service and your objective viewpoint always.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if I remember correctly, and I'm 67, so I might not, back in high school government, that the president and the Supreme Court justices can get together and create legislation. Does that ring a bell with you?
No, I don't.
No?
That doesn't make any, that doesn't comport with my understanding of the Constitution.
Okay. Then something I just understood wrong, which is, it was
the Supreme Court, though, does make law. And it's not in the Constitution that they have the authority to do that. And
I understand that, yeah.
It's called judicial supremacy and judicial review. And it came about as a result of the 1803 Marbury versus Madison case, which made Thomas Jefferson crazy because he was the president at the time. And it was when the Supreme Court basically said, we can make law, we can strike down laws. And typically they had just struck down laws. But occasionally they made law. I mean, in Dred Scott, that was the second time that judicial review was used in the first 60 years of the United States. The first time was in 1803. Yeah. The second was Dred Scott in 1856, where they said that African Americans were property, not people. And,
right.
And that was law being created by, it was Roger Taney, actually, was the guy Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he thought, this will solve the problem for all time. And instead it led us right into the Civil War.
So do we have any options when it comes to making clear to the cabinet that there is no private, and the Congress, that there should be no privatization of public land or infrastructure? I'm concerned about this whole, the country will put up $100 billion and the billionaire Boys Club will put up 900 or whatever.
Right.
And then they own the roads.
That's right. And they put a toll road every...
Do you think that they're going to let us drive on those roads without tolls?
No, of course not. That's the whole point. This is an investment. So I share your concerns, Cindy, and we just all have to raise hell and stay wide awake. Thank you very much for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back right after this. It's 28 minutes past the hour. As of this morning, nearly 130,000 Facebook users have, quote, checked in. So this is all over social media because people actually care, right? People want to know what's going on. White people, too. But is it going to make it into... Is it going to make it into the corporate media? Have you seen anything in the corporate media? I mean, occasionally there's a passing reference. Oh, those crazy Indians, they're talking about sacred land. We all know land isn't sacred. You pay property taxes on land. Land is property. Right? There's nothing alive there. Ancestors, what are you talking about? Come on. That's not our culture. See, this is the riff. I mean, this is a third of the book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
is, where we say we are an inclusive country. Everybody's welcome. It's the great melting pot. Isn't that a wonderful thing? But there's really a subset message to that. I mean, that's the principal message, and that's the myth that we live out. But the fact of the matter is that if you want to be successful in this society, you need to learn to talk like a white person, to behave like a white person, to plug into the white power structure in this country. White privilege is real. And people of color can sometimes acquire a little bit of it, as it were. But never the whole thing. Of course, never the whole thing. So how much is the fact that the corporate media in the United States, which is virtually entirely white-controlled, virtually entirely, the vast majority of the producers are white, the vast majority of the reporters are white, the vast majority of the executives are white, the owners and the large stockholders are virtually all white. What kind of impact does that have on what kind of news gets covered? And how that news gets covered? Now, you ask minorities in this country, they'll tell you we've been noticing it for years and years. I remember back in the 60s, I played a Dick Gregory album, The Light Side, The Dark Side, four sides, back to back, the whole thing, when I was doing an all-night progressive rock show, and I got fired for it. The only time I've ever been fired. WVIC in Lansing, Michigan. And you've probably heard, I've told the story before, so I'm not going to repeat it. But one of the points that Dick Gregory made in that album, and over the years, I've gotten to know him. We've been to Europe together. We've been to Africa together. His son is my chiropractor. It's like he's a great guy. He lives here in D.C. now. He's been on this program. In fact, most recently, just 6 months ago or so. And he made the comment that the only images growing up as a young black man in St. Louis, Missouri, that the only images that he saw of black women were basically Aunt Jemima. And he made the joke, and I never wanted to have sex with Aunt Jemima, or words to that effect. And that was, back then, it was like the media was just like so clearly, so completely a white-controlled media, as it were. And it was of, by, and for essentially white people. People of color pretty much didn't exist in our media, except as character actors. And the characters, of course, were always bad guys, or stupid people, or buffoons. And, yes, that started to change with the primetime rule when you got independent production companies producing television programs in the 70s and 80s, and it started getting better in the 90s, and it's better today. You're seeing, more diversity on television, but it still doesn't reflect the diversity of America. And it doesn't even begin to reflect the people who were the original, any part of the lives of the people who were the original occupants of this continent. So, I'm of the opinion that the reason that you're seeing no Standing Rock coverage, if you want to get Standing Rock coverage, you gotta tune in Amy Goodman or listen to this program, basically. The reason why is that it's not white people. Now, I know when I go off on these rants about white privilege, I get all these conservative callers telling me I'm nuts. Feel free. Convince me I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong about this.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Wow, let me just a heads up. In These Times is an online newspaper, magazine, whatever. There may be a print version of it. In fact, there used to be. InTheseTimes.com is the website. And they've got a new article up. It's by Antonio Juhas, I'm guessing. Juhaszz. Juhas. And the title is Rex Tillerson Could Be America's Most Dangerous Secretary of State. And they're talking about ExxonMobil in here. And I just want to quote from the article. I don't know this to be true. I'm reading this in These Times, and it's like I'm not the investigative reporter. But this is pretty remarkable. It says the author wrote, when Rex Tillerson, appears in January, this will be day after tomorrow, before the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee to be considered for the U.S. Secretary of State, ExxonMobil will be preparing to appear before a jury in the U.S. District Court of District Columbia, just a few blocks away. There, the company will face allegations that security forces under its employ engaged in serious human rights abuses, including murder, torture, sexual violence, kidnapping, battery, assault, burning, arbitrary arrest, detention, and false imprisonment. The complaint specifically names Rex Tillerson. Among the plaintiffs, all of whom use aliases for fear of their lives, is John Doe 2. According to the complaint, again, I'm reading from this In These Times article. According to the complaint, in August of 2000, soldiers working for ExxonMobil beat and tortured him, quote, using electricity all over his body, including his genitals. After approximately 3 months, the, quote, soldiers, when I say quote, this is all a quote from the article, but this is the quote within the quote is the quote of this guy saying this is what they did to me. He said, the soldiers took off his blindfold, took him outside the building where he had been detained, and showed him a pit where there was a large pile of human heads. The soldiers threatened to kill him and add his head to the pile. He was ultimately released only to have the soldiers return later to burn down his house. This is pretty amazing stuff. This was in Aceh province, Indonesia, where ExxonMobil was trying to protect their natural gas operations, apparently. Committed the cited offenses against local villagers. This is, again, according to this article. So maybe we can get Antonia on. I'm curious as to the province of this. Where did these stories come from? How did this start? What is this all about? Michael, speaking of upcoming Senate confirmations, looks like that's the title of or the reason why you called. Hey, Michael, in Imperial Beach, California, what's on your mind?
You got it, Mr. Hartman. How you doing? Okay, good. About the Senate confirmations coming up, starting tomorrow. This is going to be Wetico on steroids. Yeah. Every one of his cabinet has either multi-tens of millions, multi-hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars. So all of his cabinet have more money than a person can spend in numerous lifetimes. So when a person like Betsy DeVos and her husband, who combined are worth roughly $10 billion, what's left to want? It has to be the intoxication of power. So, Tom, in your opinion, what is more intoxicating? A broken man with absolute power, Trump, or a more money than God in their evangelical cult followers? Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Michael, I realize it's a rhetorical question, so I'm not going to try and answer it, but I think it's a really interesting point that you raised. Thank you for the call. Dominic in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Dominic, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Hartman. I just wanted to point out that here from the great state of San Antonio, Texas, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has made it a priority to focus on the Texas Privacy Act, which is basically similar bill in North Carolina, which we know what happened over there. Also, I wanted to follow up with one little other thing that, and I think Victoria Jones might have touched on this, that 6 confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet are occurring on, I believe, January 11th. And on that note also, it's going to be on the same day that Republican Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has scheduled a rapid-fire series of budget items dubbed a vote-a-rama that will include votes related to repealing the Affordable Care Act And also, Trump also scheduled his first news conference for the same day. And it's the first one since July, when he called on Russian hackers to go after Hillary Clinton emails. And that's all I want to say, sir.
Yeah. Well, you said it very well, Dominic, and it's absolutely what's going on. And, you know, as I said earlier in the show, I think that they're trying to do everything they can to deflect attention away from probably Rex Tillerson and Jeff Sessions. I think those are the two nominees, although Tom Price is going to have some serious problems. You know, the guy who's going to be in charge of health, education, and welfare, who has spent his life basically dissing Medicare, Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and you know, as an opponent, shall we say, of any kind of national health care system. So it's going to be a wild day. Wednesday's going to be a wild day, and we'll see. This is going to be a real test of Chuck Schumer's leadership, and it's going to be a real test of the ability of Chuck Schumer to get Democrats to rally around him, particularly some of the Democrats who are kind of on the fringe of the Democratic Party, like Joe Manchin. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. It's going to be a fascinating day, though, and we need to be paying attention. And if you want to call your member of Congress and tell them, have courage, fight the good fight, particularly your senators, your Democratic senators, the number for Congress is 202-225-3121. Dominic, thanks for the call. Mary Ann in Everett, Michigan. Hey, Mary Ann, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Sorry, I had to hang up on you the last couple times because of my phone puking out.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
But anyway, what I wanted to say was, number one, the last guy that was just talking about the Trump people or whatever, you know, it's just becoming more and more apparent that the Republicans took their new playbook directly from Twitler's encyclopedia, you know. But you were talking earlier about the press and the media overall, and I heard yesterday that they are not going to hold a press day with the quote-unquote upper crust of major media outlets this year like they normally do to take questions about things. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll bet the reason why is because they don't want to answer the question, why did you guys give Donald Trump $3 billion worth of free publicity and make him president?
In part, yes. And then also, while he's a sitting president, why are you allowing him to be an executive producer on a reality TV
right.
show, which is ridiculous. But here's the other thing that I heard today from Politico. Okay, this was supposedly a quote from Donald J. Trump. He said, I am going to give my cabinet secretaries and top aides, quote unquote, significant latitudes to run federal agencies because I don't have particularly strong feelings on the intricacies of some government agencies or issues and would prefer to focus on high profile issues, publicity, and quote unquote his brand.
Wait a minute, who said this?
Donald Trump. It was reported in Politico this morning.
When did he say this?
I'm guessing either late last night or sometime this morning or something.
Well, that perfectly comports with the sales pitch that Donald Trump Jr. made, the big game hunter, to John Kasich, which is, how'd you like to be the most powerful vice president in history? Donald Trump is not interested in all the details of governing. He just wants to be the guy who runs the brand, basically.
And then his brand benefits financially, which he also told us in the very beginning. I will quite likely be the only person to run for the presidency that will make money doing it.
Yes. And I got to tell you, Mary,
I'll let you go because I'm sure you have other calls.
Yeah, no, actually, we're going to hit a break here. But I at the very beginning of the campaign, I gave a $5 contribution to Donald Trump and to his presidential campaign so that I would get on their email list and everything. And I am now getting, like, every day, it's now down to maybe every other day, an offer for $40 for a Donald Trump mug, inauguration mug, $35 for a Donald Trump inauguration shot glass or whatever. I mean, they are selling stuff like there's no tomorrow.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
The Trump store, I would bet, is making millions, at least, based on what I'm seeing in my inbox. It's such a beautiful picture of the Capitol, just a few blocks from here. Let's see. Charles, watching Free Speech TV in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, real quick. Dana Siegelman is trying to get 100,000 signatures so that the White House has to look at the petition to pardon Don Siegelman, and they're like at 14,000. Could I petition your listeners to go to Don Siegelman petition and sign one of those petitions so we can get it to the 100,000 mark?
Sure. And you can find the information at free-don.com, right?
Yes. And real quickly, Tom, I'm 73, and I used to listen to William Buckley. One time on his Firing Line show, he quoted a book by an author from LaSalle College. And I remember this because I lived about 5 blocks from LaSalle College in Philadelphia. And he said this author hypothesized that the United States and Russia would one day be great friends because the ruling population in both countries is Caucasian. Now, that's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it?
It is. And, it would comport with that kind of identity politics, conservative worldview. All the white people are going to get together, basically.
Yeah. It was like 1968.
Yeah.
By the way, Bill Buckley, as right-wing as he was, he's the man who got me interested in politics because of his pattern of thinking. So,
me too.
I disagreed with him, but I appreciated him.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it wasn't Bill Buckley; it was my dad. But my dad and I used to sit and watch Firing Line together, and then we'd have these long political conversations as a consequence of it. And in fact, I went. It's been a year or two now, but I went off on YouTube and on the internet looking for old copies of Firing Line. The old shows, and I couldn't find any. I could find a couple little clips, but
he was fun to listen to because you could see him trying to think logically and clearly, and you just don't see that much anymore, do you?
No, he was an honest conservative intellectual. I mean, he was honest to the point that Bill Buckley would tell you right up front that the ruling class should have more power because they got to become the ruling class by being so smart, or words to that effect. I mean, he was very much a Thomas Hobbesian conservative.
John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, that whole strain.
Yep. Yeah, there's that strain of American conservatism that you can trace actually back to Sir Edmund Burke.
Yes. Yeah, good. Okay, so sign that petition, everybody. Let's get 100,000 signatures. So at least President Obama has to look at it. And the mystery of why he doesn't pardon Don is something I hope someday he'll answer.
I agree. It's I think it's a great injustice. Thank you, Charles. Sean in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
How you doing? Keep up your great work, sir.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I'm a chiropractor, and I've done a lot of research on the vaccinations. Now, in California, they just made the law where there is no longer an exception to get vaccinated, like by a medical doctor or religious reason. If you do not get your children's shots, they're no longer allowed to go to school in California. Now, that's Big Pharma there trying to make money and control people. If anyone just does the smallest amount of research and looks at the ingredients of vaccines, it'll appall you. Now, I just want to know your thought on, say, for example, repealing Obamacare. Let's just say, hypothetically, that Trump really wanted to stop Obamacare because, as according to the Constitution, people aren't supposed to be forced to buy from a third party. But the question is, if Trump really did want to stop Obamacare and stop these children getting vaccinated, basically forced to get vaccinated, what would have to be done?
I honestly don't know, Sean. I just don't know. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Karen in Des Moines, Iowa. Hey, Karen, thanks for being a first-time caller, and thanks for sitting on hold so long. I appreciate it. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I would like to bring the conversation back to tariffs. I have a question about that. My question is, I know how you feel about the national debt, but Republicans have made such an issue about the national debt. I'm wondering if Democrats agree to use some of the money raised from tariffs to pay down our debt to China, if it would make it harder for Republicans to fight it.
Well, that's an interesting thought. See, there's two debts, and this is what most people get confused about. There's the debt that we have as a nation as a result of selling treasuries. In other words, issuing IOUs and borrowing that money, putting it into the treasury, and then spending it for whatever functions the government does. And that debt right now, the gross debt is around 19 trillion. About 5 trillion of that is money that the government owes itself, the Social Security Trust Fund and a whole bunch of other trust funds and things. So it's actually probably around $14 trillion. That's our actual national debt, which is, 60, 70, 80% of GDP, depending on how you calculate it, which number you accept. Japan's national debt right now, by the way, is 200% of GDP, and has been for some time. That's not the debt that is the thing to worry about. We've actually paid off our national debt once before. It was done during the Andrew Jackson administration. He campaigned for president on it. And what it did was it produced the deepest and longest depression in the history of the United States, because that debt, on the one hand, is the debt of the country, but it's also the private savings of the individuals in the country. Buying a treasury bill, which is U.S. debt, is the safest investment you can make. It's never been defaulted on in 240 some odd, however long this country has been around. On the other hand, we've got the trade deficit and debt. And the trade deficit is the annual amount that we bought more than we sold. And it's been averaging between $400 and $600 trillion a year for at least the last 20 years. And it used to be always a trade surplus. We had a trade surplus from the George Washington era right up until the Reagan era. And then starting with the Reagan administration, we started having trade debts because of these so-called free trade agreements. And the trade debt tends to turn itself into foreign ownership of the United States. So, if we buy $600 billion worth of stuff from China, more than we sell to them, they end up sitting on $600 billion of U.S. dollars. But where can you spend U.S. dollars? Ultimately, the only place you can spend them is in the United States. So they come to the United States and they buy up real estate, they buy up buildings, they buy up businesses, in particular things that will generate profits that they can take back to China. So now we're in this situation where more than 1/7 of all assets in the United States are owned by foreigners because of that trade debt. And that trade debt is not measured in an aggregate form the way that the national debt is. And the national debt, we have an annual deficit. Our deficit this year is going to be around $600 billion. And then we have the national debt, which is the aggregate of all that deficit, which is the 19 trillion. With regard to the trade debt, or the trade, there's actually a fancy economic term for it that's eluding me at the moment. Balance of payments is what it's called. With regard to the balance of payments, that doesn't get aggregated year after year. It's just we look at 1 year. Oh, okay, this year it was, last year it was a little worse. This year it's a little better. A lot of it has to do with the price of oil because we used to import a lot of oil. So in that context, in that understanding, Karen, am I answering your question or am I further muddying the waters?
No, I understand. I'm just wondering how we use tariff money to make it a win-win situation with Republicans.
Oh yeah, well that would be very simple. You're absolutely right. Just the very simple say, we're going to go back to having a tariff-based trade system that will advantage American producers and American workers and ultimately American consumers. And the money from those tariffs, we're going to use the same way that every president from George Washington to Ronald Reagan used, which is to help fund the operations of the government of the United States. I mean, it literally, every president, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, you can just go through the list. Every one of them, their salaries were paid for by income from tariffs. Every member of Congress, it was paid for by tariffs. The Supreme Court was paid for by tariffs. All of the buildings and construction, the Capitol, all this stuff, it was all paid for with tariff money. And it wasn't until the 1980s, basically, that our tariff revenue shrank down to the point where it was pretty much irrelevant. I mean, our revenue from tariffs now is just, a few $1 billion a year rather than it used to be hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So I think you're onto something, Karen, and I think it's a great way to sell it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for the call and thanks for the suggestion. I will try to use it sometime. Rob in Phoenix, listening on KPHX. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, thank you. Let me take you off speaker real quick.
Thank you very kindly, Rob.
Figure out how to do this. Okay. Anyways, can you hear me?
Yeah. What's up?
Okay. Hey, I just got a question. Like, since Trump is not separating his business interests from his presidency, can't we just request his taxes and all his connections through the Freedom of Information Act? Can't we just flood them on day one?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer to the question, Bob, Rob, excuse me. But it's, I'm guessing if it's possible, that's the sort of thing that Chuck Schumer's probably all over right now.
I almost hesitated to bring it up just in case they got wind of it and tried to change the rules.
Well, you know, I'm sure they thought of it long before we did. But that would be a real interesting to file a FOIA, because now he's the president. You know, and he's integrating the two. That would be very interesting. And like I said earlier, I think that if he, you know, he in some ways, at least with regard to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and trade, Donald Trump ran in the Republican primary as a Democrat, which is why he won the Republican primary. And I continue to believe, if he tries to govern like a Democrat, at least in those areas, that his own party will probably impeach him so that Mike Pence can come in, because Mike Pence is a free trader and does not like tariffs, and, you know, wants multinational corporations to rule the world, and hates Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So, you know, this would be the way that they would replace Trump with Pence. And they would probably use this as the device to do it. That he's up to his eyeballs in conflicts of interest. Anyhow, we'll have to wait and see. Rob, thanks for the call. Jerry in North Waterboro, Maine. Jerry, thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We have 1 minute to the end of the show. It's all yours.
Tom, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure talking to you. I've been listening to you since Air America days.
Thank you.
Doing great stuff. I wanted to call and talk about Meryl Streep's speech at the Golden Globes last night, because I think she gave us the blueprint for talking to and about our incoming president. We know that he loves the notoriety and likes driving the news cycle and likes to hear his own name spoke. But she gave an eloquent speech about the what, without ever mentioning his name.
Right.
I'm sure that drove him crazy, and we heard the subsequent Twitter storm from it and whatnot. So I think that's obviously not the only tool. Obviously, we need to get involved and be active and change those, work against those policies that we know are crazy. Yeah. But I think that's a tool that we have in our arsenal to speak to the things that he says and does without mentioning him and sort of ignoring him.
It's sort of, the good news is that Donald Trump is psychologically very vulnerable. He's a very fragile person. That's also the bad news. That the president of the United States is a psychological basket case. Jerry, thanks for the call. Excellent point. Excellent point. And thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. As our president says, as Bernie says, it's not a spectator sport. You got to get out there. You've got to get active. We need participation now more than ever. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.